The advertisement had been brief, brutal even. Wanted, woman of sound mind and body. Purpose, matrimonial arrangement with specific terms. Compensation, security, shelter, stability. Romantic inclinations unnecessary. Inquiries to R. Calder, Broken Creek Ranch, Montana Territory. Elena had read it 17 times before she finally responded. 17 times, letting each cold transactional word sink in like stones thrown into a frozen lake. She'd laughed bitterly at first. What kind of man advertised for a wife like he was hiring ranch hands? But the laughter died quickly, replaced by the hollow ache that had become her constant companion. She was 28 years old. In 1883, that made her a relic, a cautionary tale. The spinster schoolteacher who'd been passed over so many times that even pity had worn thin in the small Wyoming town she'd called home. 3 failed engagements, each man finding someone younger, softer, more agreeable. The last one, Thomas, hadn't even had the courage to tell her himself. She'd found out when his mother delivered the ring back, wrapped in a handkerchief embroidered with another woman's initials. The school board had let her go 2 months later. Declining enrollment, they'd said, though everyone knew the real reason. Parents didn't want their children taught by a woman who couldn't even manage to get herself married, as if spinsterhood were contagious. Elena had exactly $43 to her name, a trunk of books, and a spine that refused to break no matter how many times life tried. So she wrote back. The response came within a week. A train ticket to Billings and instructions to wait at the Silver Star Hotel. He would collect her on Friday. Now, sitting in the hotel's sparse lobby, with her trunk at her feet and her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles showed white, Elena wondered if desperation had finally made her reckless. The other women in the lobby kept glancing at her, some with curiosity, others with the kind of knowing pity that made her skin crawl. They could smell failure on her. She was certain of it. The door opened, letting in a gust of October wind that carried the scent of dust and approaching winter. Rhett Calder didn't enter a room. He occupied it. 6 feet of lean, weathered muscle, with shoulders broad enough to carry burdens that would break lesser men. His face was all hard angles and sun-carved lines, the kind of handsome that came with a warning label. Dark hair, longer than fashion dictated, brushed his collar. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath, gray as gunmetal, assessing everything with the cold efficiency of a man who'd learned to trust nothing and expect less. Those eyes found her immediately. Miss Ward. It wasn't a question. He'd clearly memorized her description from her letter. Brown hair, medium height, unremarkable features except for her eyes, which one particularly cruel suitor had once called too intelligent for a woman. Mr. Calder. She stood, grateful her voice didn't shake. She'd promised herself that much. No trembling, no tears, no visible weakness. He didn't offer his hand, didn't smile. Just gave her a single, thorough assessment that made her feel like livestock at auction. Something hot and bitter rose in her throat. Shame mixed with anger, mixed with the terrible knowledge that she'd put herself here voluntarily. Trunk? She nodded toward it. He lifted it with one hand, her entire life reduced to something he could carry without effort, and gestured toward the door. Wagon's outside. It's a 3-hour ride to the ranch. We'll talk on the way. No pleasantries. No attempt to make this easier. Elena grabbed her smaller bag and followed him into the street, where a sturdy wagon waited, hitched to 2 massive draft horses that looked as no-nonsense as their owner. He loaded her trunk, then offered his hand to help her up. The first time he touched her. His palm was calloused, warm despite the cold air, and he released her the instant she was settled. Then he swung up beside her, took the reins, and clicked his tongue. The horses moved. They'd gone a full mile before he spoke. I'm going to lay out the terms plainly. If you object to anything, say so now. Once we're at the ranch, the decision is made. Elena stared straight ahead at the rutted road stretching toward mountains that looked like broken teeth against the sky. I'm listening. I need an heir. Not for sentiment, for survival. Broken Creek is 6,000 acres. I've spent 12 years building it from nothing. When I'm gone, it needs to go to blood, not be carved up by the territory and sold to whoever has the cash. His voice was flat, reciting facts like a ledger. No emotion, no warmth. I'm offering marriage in legal terms only. You'll have your own room, your own space. I won't force myself on you outside of the necessary purpose. Heat flooded Elena's cheeks, but she kept her expression neutral. This was why she was here. She'd known that when she wrote back. Once you're pregnant, that arrangement ends. You'll have freedom to manage the house as you see fit. When the child is born, you'll raise it. I'm not equipped for that and won't pretend otherwise. In exchange, you'll have security, a roof over your head, food, clothing, and a position of respect as my wife. On paper, at minimum. And if I don't get pregnant? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Then we keep trying until you do, or we accept it's not meant to be. I won't cast you out either way. The agreement stands. How generous, she said, and immediately regretted it. His head turned slightly, those cold eyes finding hers. For a moment, she thought she saw something flicker there. Surprise, maybe, or the faintest hint of amusement. But it vanished before she could be sure. I'm not generous, Miss Ward. I'm practical. A woman stranded without resources becomes my problem, and I don't create problems I can't solve. You keep your end, I'll keep mine. And what exactly is my end? Bear a child. Run the household. Don't embarrass me in town or create drama with the ranch hands. That's all I require. All. As if those weren't life-altering, soul-crushing demands wrapped up in clinical language. Elena turned away, watching the landscape roll past. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. Endless grass the color of wheat, stands of pine in the distance, mountains that seemed to promise both shelter and danger. This would be her home, this vast, empty territory ruled by a man who spoke of heirs like he was breeding horses. I'm not looking for romance, she said finally. I stopped believing in that a long time ago. Good. Then we understand each other. But I won't be treated like livestock either. That got his attention. He pulled the horses to a stop, turning to face her fully. Up close, she could see the small scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the sun damage on his skin, the weight he carried in those gray eyes. Not cruelty exactly, but something that had been worn down until only the essential hardness remained. I don't mistreat what's mine, he said, and the possessiveness in that statement sent a shiver down her spine that was equal parts warning and something else she didn't want to name. I'm not yours yet. No, but you will be by tomorrow evening, if you're staying. There's a preacher in town who owes me a favor. We'll make it legal before we go back to the ranch. Tomorrow. One more day of freedom before she became Mrs. Rhett Calder, wife in name, broodmare in function. And if I say no? If I ask you to turn around right now? He considered her for a long moment. Then I turn around. Take you back to Billings. Give you enough money for a ticket wherever you want to go. No hard feelings. Just like that? Just like that. He picked up the reins again. I'm not in the business of forcing anyone into anything, Miss Ward. But I am in the business of making decisions and living with them. So decide. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and something wilder. In the distance, a hawk circled, hunting. This land didn't forgive weakness, didn't offer second chances. It simply was. Harsh and beautiful and brutally honest. Elena thought of the $43 in her bag, the small Wyoming town where whispers followed her like shadows, the three men who'd promised her futures and delivered humiliation instead, the school where she'd poured her heart into teaching children who'd been taken from her because she was unmarked, unclaimed, unwanted. She thought of growing old alone in some boarding house, her intelligence and strength meaning nothing because she'd never managed to make herself small enough, soft enough, quiet enough for a man to choose her. At least here, the terms were honest. No false promises. No pretense of love that would curdle into disappointment. Just a transaction. Brutal, yes, but clean. I'm staying, she said. Rhett nodded once, clicked to the horses, and they resumed their journey. Neither of them spoke again until the ranch came into view. Broken Creek sprawled across the valley like an empire in miniature. The main house was larger than Elena had expected. 2 stories of solid timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Outbuildings dotted the property. Barns, stables, a bunkhouse for the hands, structures whose purposes she couldn't yet identify. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, and she could see men working, their movements purposeful and coordinated. Rhett had built this. From nothing, he'd said. She believed it. Everything about the place spoke of discipline, efficiency, order imposed on wilderness through sheer force of will. He pulled the wagon up to the house and set the brake. This time, he didn't help her down. just grabbed her trunk and headed for the door, leaving her to manage on her own. Elena climbed down carefully, her legs stiff from the ride, and followed. Inside, the house was sparse, clean, but without softness. Functional furniture, no decorations except a single painting above the fireplace. A mountain landscape that was more ominous than beautiful. The floors were swept, the windows clean, but there was no warmth here. No sense that anyone actually lived in these rooms, only occupied them between tasks. "Your room is upstairs, second door on the left." Rhett set her trunk down at the base of the stairs. "Mine is at the end of the hall. There's a washroom between them. You'll have it to yourself during the day. I use it early before dawn." Of course he did. Probably had his entire life scheduled down to the minute. "Dinner is at 6, breakfast at 5. If you're not a morning person, you'll learn to be. Ranch runs on daylight, not preference." Elena bristled. "I've been supporting myself for 10 years, Mr. Calder. I know how to keep a schedule." "Good." He moved toward what she assumed was his office. "Get settled. We leave for town at 8 tomorrow morning." "Wait." He stopped, turned. Is there a housekeeper? Staff?" "Woman named Martha comes 3 times a week to handle the heavy cleaning. Otherwise, you're it. I'm not running a manor house, Miss Ward, just a working ranch." "I can cook," she said, lifting her chin. "Clean, manage accounts if needed. I'm not useless." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. "Never thought you were. Woman who comes all this way on terms like these isn't useless, just desperate." He paused. "Like recognizes like." Before she could respond, he was gone, disappearing into his office and closing the door with quiet finality. Elena stood in the center of the empty room, her bag at her feet, and felt the full weight of what she'd done settle over her shoulders. Tomorrow, she'd be married to a stranger. Tomorrow night. She shoved the thought away, grabbed her bag, and climbed the stairs. The room he'd given her was surprisingly large. A bed with a simple quilt, a dresser, a small table by the window with a chair. The window looked out over the ranch, all the way to the mountains. As prisons went, it could be worse. She unpacked methodically, hanging her 3 dresses in the wardrobe, arranging her books on the table, placing her mother's photograph, the only family she had left, on the dresser. The familiar rituals steadied her. This was just another change, another adaptation. She'd survived worse, hadn't she? Dinner was awkward. Silence, punctuated by the clink of silverware. Rhett had prepared a simple meal: steak, potatoes, bread. He ate efficiently, the way he seemed to do everything, his attention on his food rather than her. Elena forced herself to eat, though anxiety had knotted her stomach. "You'll meet the hands tomorrow," Rhett said finally. 5 of them full-time, more during cattle drives. They know you're coming, they'll be respectful or they'll be gone. "I don't need you to threaten people on my behalf." Wasn't a threat. Statement of fact. He took a drink of water. "This is rough country, Miss Ward. Men here aren't used to, refinement. They'll test boundaries. That's why I'm setting them now. I've dealt with difficult men before." "I'm sure you have." His eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw something that might have been actual interest. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone more compliant. Desperate women usually are." Heat flared in her chest. "I am desperate, Mr. Calder. I'm just not broken." "Good." He pushed back from the table. "I don't need broken. I need strong." He stood, gathering his plate. "I'll clean up. You should rest. Tomorrow's a long day." Elena watched him move to the kitchen area, this man who'd reduced marriage to a contract and her to a means to an end. She should hate him. Part of her did. But another part, the part that had learned to read people through years of navigating social minefields, saw something else. He was damaged. As damaged as she was, just in different ways. He'd built walls so high and thick that nothing could breach them, and he called that strength, called it survival. Maybe it was. Maybe that's all any of them could do out here, survive. She stood, taking her own plate to the kitchen. He glanced at her, surprised. "I'll do my share," she said simply. That was the agreement. For a moment they stood side by side at the basin, washing dishes in silence. His arm brushed hers once, accidental contact that sent an unexpected jolt through her. She pulled away quickly, and if he noticed, he didn't show it. When they finished, he dried his hands and turned to her. In the lamplight, his features were softer, the harsh lines eased by shadow. He was younger than she'd thought, maybe 35, though the land had aged him beyond his years. Elena? Her name for the first time. Not Miss Ward. I'm not good at this, at talking, at making people comfortable. But I'll honor the agreement. You have my word. And your word means something? It's all I have that does. She believed him. Against her better judgment, against every warning instinct, she believed him. Then I'll hold you to it, she said. He nodded, something that might have been respect flickering across his face. Good night. Good night? She climbed the stairs to her temporary sanctuary, closed the door, and sat on the bed in the darkness. Through the walls, she could hear the faint sounds of Rhett moving around below. Boots on wood, a door closing, the house settling into night. Tomorrow, she'd be his wife. Tomorrow night, she'd fulfill the purpose he'd bought her for. And somewhere in the vast emptiness between who she'd been and who she was becoming, Elena Ward made herself a promise. She would survive this, would endure. And maybe, just maybe, she'd find a way to live again, even in a life built on transactions instead of tenderness. Outside her window, the Montana sky stretched endless and cold, stars scattered like broken glass across black velvet. Beautiful and brutal, just like everything else in this place. Just like the man sleeping down the hall, whose iron will and careful walls might be the only things standing between civilization and chaos. Just like her. The preacher's house smelled of old books and older regrets. Reverend Matthews was a rail-thin man with kind eyes and hands that trembled slightly as he opened his Bible. His wife, a soft-spoken woman named Grace, served as witness, her expression carefully neutral as she took in the odd couple before her. Elena wore her best dress, dark green wool, high-necked and practical. Rhett wore the same clothes he'd worn yesterday, though he'd shaved and combed his hair back with water that was already drying in the morning heat. They stood before the Reverend like strangers at a business meeting, which Elena supposed they were. "Do you," Rhett called her, "take this woman?" The words washed over her like water. She heard herself respond when prompted, her voice steady, her hands clasped in front of her to hide their shaking. Rhett's responses were clipped, efficient. When the Reverend asked if anyone objected, Elena almost laughed. Who would be here to object? Who even knew or cared? "You may kiss the bride." Rhett hesitated just for a second. Then he leaned down. He was nearly a foot taller than her and pressed his lips to hers. Brief, dry, impersonal as a handshake. But his hand, steadying her elbow, was warm. "I now pronounce you man and wife." And just like that, Elena Ward ceased to exist. In her place stood Elena Calder, wife of Rhett, mistress of Broken Creek Ranch, purchased and paid for. They signed the papers. Reverend Matthews offered congratulations that sounded more like condolences. Grace pressed a small loaf of bread into Elena's hands. "For luck," she whispered, though her eyes said she thought luck had abandoned this union before it began. Back in the wagon, marriage certificate tucked in Rhett's jacket pocket, they rode in silence. Elena clutched the bread in her lap, its weight somehow comforting. "Tonight," Rhett said, eyes on the road, "we'll fulfill the terms, get it done. Then you can settle into whatever routine suits you. Get it done. Like shoeing a horse or mending a fence." "I'm not a virgin," Elena said, and watched him glance at her sharply. "I thought you should know. In case it matters." "It doesn't." A pause. "Is that why I'm unmarried at 28? "No." She kept her voice level, though old shame tried to claw its way up her throat. "I was engaged. He died in a mining accident 2 months before the wedding. The others, they simply changed their minds." "Their loss," Rhett said, and it sounded like he might actually mean it. "Is it?" Elena looked at him. "You don't know me. I could be terrible, shrewish, difficult. You probably are." He almost smiled. "So am I. That's not what this is about." "What is it about then? Really?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, 12 years ago I was engaged too, Catherine. Beautiful, educated, everything a man was supposed to want. I was 23, thought I'd conquer the world with her by my side. Elena waited. She lasted 3 months out here, cried every night, begged to go back east. When I said no, said I'd invested everything into this land. She left anyway, took half my savings and married a banker in Chicago. His jaw tightened. Sent me a letter saying she'd made a mistake, that she'd thought she loved me but realized she'd only loved the idea of me. I'm sorry. Don't be. She was right. The ranch is all I am, all I'll ever be. After her, I swore I'd never mix business with emotion again. Need a wife? Make it a business arrangement. Need an heir? Same thing. Clean, honest, no illusions. No disappointment, Elena added softly. Exactly. They crossed onto Calderland. She could tell by the change in Rhett's posture, the way he sat straighter, eyes scanning his domain. This was where he belonged, where he made sense. What about you? He asked. Why agree to this? You're educated, capable. You could have found work somewhere. Could I? She heard the bitterness in her voice, tried to soften it. I'm a spinster schoolteacher who lost her position. No family, no connections, no prospects. Even if I found work, it would be temporary. Women like me? We're tolerated until we're not. Until our presence becomes an embarrassment or an inconvenience. At least here, I have a purpose. A place. It may not be what I dreamed of as a girl, but dreams are luxuries I can't afford anymore. Rhett nodded slowly. Then we're both practical people making a practical choice. Yes, Elena agreed. But as the ranch house came into view, its windows catching the afternoon sun like watchful eyes, she wondered if practicality would be enough. If two people could really live side by side, share a bed when necessary, raise a child together, and never feel anything beyond contractual obligation. She wondered and feared the answer might be no. The hands lined up outside the barn like soldiers for inspection. 5 men, ranging from a grizzled veteran named Hank, who looked 60 and was probably 45, to a kid called Jimmy, who couldn't be more than 19. They pulled their hats off as Rhett approached with Elena at his side. This is my wife, Elena, Rhett said flatly. Mrs. Calder. She's in charge of the house and anything else I assign her. You'll treat her with respect, answer her questions if she has any, and stay out of her way otherwise. Clear? A chorus of yes, sir, and ma'am followed. Elena studied them, reading body language the way she'd learned to read students. Hank, curious but reserved. Jimmy, openly impressed. The other 3, Pete, Dan, and a man they called Scar for obvious reasons, ranged from indifferent to mildly skeptical. If you need anything from the house, ask, Elena said, finding her voice. I'm not here to make your lives harder. Appreciated, ma'am, Hank said, and she caught something that might have been approval in his weathered face. Rhett dismissed them with a jerk of his head, and they dispersed back to work. He turned to Elena. They're good men, loyal, but they're rough. Don't wander out to the bunkhouse alone, especially at night. Not because they'd hurt you, he added quickly, but because, it's not appropriate. I have no intention of wandering anywhere, Elena said. I know my place. Do you? He studied her with those unreadable gray eyes. I'm not sure either of us does yet. Before she could respond, he was walking away, his long stride eating up the ground toward the stables. Always moving, always working. As if stillness might let something catch up to him, doubt maybe, or regret, or the ghosts of dreams he'd buried along with his heart. Elena watched him go, then turned toward the house. Her house now, her responsibility. Her cage or her sanctuary, depending on how she chose to see it. She spent the rest of the day exploring, learning the layout, taking inventory of the kitchen, the pantry, the rooms she'd be expected to maintain. Martha, the housekeeper, had left everything spotless, but there was still work to do. Always work. The ranch demanded it, and so did survival. As the sun dipped toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of copper and blood, Elena found herself standing at the window of her room, watching Rhett work with one of the horses in the corral below. His movements were patient, methodical, nothing like the cold efficiency he showed everywhere else. With the horse, he was gentle, almost tender. So he was capable of softness. He'd just buried it so deep that only animals could reach it. The thought should have comforted her. Instead, it made something ache in her chest. Not desire, not exactly, but a recognition of kindred damage. They were both so good at surviving, at adapting, at making do. But neither of them knew how to actually live anymore. Maybe that's why this would work. Two people who'd given up on living could at least survive together. The sun set. Darkness claimed the ranch. Elena lit a lamp and prepared for dinner, moving through the motions with practiced ease. Rhett came in exactly at 6, washed up, sat down. They ate in familiar silence. When he stood to clear the dishes, he paused. "After," he said quietly. "After we're done cleaning up. Come to my room." Elena's hands stilled on her plate. This was it. The fulfillment of terms. The purpose she'd been purchased for. "All right," she managed. They cleaned up together again. A strange domestic ritual that felt both ordinary and surreal. When the last dish was dried, Rhett hung the towel carefully and turned to her. "You don't have to be afraid," he said. I won't hurt you." "I know." And strangely, she did know. Whatever else Rhett called her was, he wasn't cruel. Just broken in ways that made him efficient, transactional, safe in his emotional distance. "Give me 10 minutes," he said, "then come up." He left her standing in the kitchen, the lamp flickering, her heart beating too fast despite her attempts to stay calm. This was what she'd agreed to, what she'd known would happen. There was no room for maidenly fear or romantic hesitation. This was business. But her hand shook as she climbed the stairs 10 minutes later, shook as she stood outside his door, shook as she raised her hand to knock. "Come in," he called before her knuckles touched wood. His room was larger than hers, but just as sparse. A big bed with plain linens, a dresser, a chair, a single lamp burning low on the nightstand. He'd changed into sleep clothes, loose cotton pants, no shirt. In the lamplight, she could see the map of scars across his torso, old wounds from a life lived hard. He saw her looking. 12 years of ranch work. You don't come out unmarked. "I know something about scars," Elena said quietly, though hers were all internal, etched on her heart instead of her skin. They stood on opposite sides of the room, the bed between them like a battlefield. Elena had expected cold efficiency, mechanical completion of terms. Instead, Rhett looked uncertain, almost as nervous as she felt. "This doesn't have to be—" He stopped, started again. "I've done this before, obviously, but not like this. Not as a transaction." "Neither have I." "Right." He moved toward her slowly, giving her time to bolt if she wanted. Stopped when he was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "Elena, if you've changed your mind—" "I haven't." She lifted her chin, met his eyes. "I keep my word too." Something flickered in his expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition of her courage. He reached for her face, his calloused hand cupping her jaw with surprising gentleness. "Then we'll get through this together," he said. And when he kissed her, really kissed her this time, not the brief press of lips from the ceremony, Elena felt something crack in the careful walls she'd built around her own damaged heart. His mouth was warm, searching, asking questions she didn't know how to answer. She kissed him back, her hands finding his bare shoulders, and felt him shudder at the contact. This wasn't supposed to feel like anything, wasn't supposed to matter. But as Rhett guided her toward the bed, his touch still gentle despite the hunger she could feel coiled in his muscles, Elena realized they'd both made a terrible miscalculation. You couldn't share something this intimate, even as a transaction, and keep it purely business. Couldn't bare your body without baring something deeper, something more vulnerable. They came together in the lamplight, two scarred people seeking warmth in the only way they knew how. There was awkwardness. Of course there was. They were strangers performing intimacy like actors in a play neither had rehearsed, but there was something else too. Something that felt dangerously close to connection, to need that went beyond the contract's cold terms. When it was over, they lay side by side in the darkness, not touching, both breathing hard. Elena felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them away fiercely. This was what she'd agreed to, what she'd wanted: security, purpose, a place to belong. So why did she feel lonelier than ever? "You should go," Rhett said quietly. "Back to your room. It's better that way. Better, safer, less complicated." Elena rose, gathering her discarded nightgown, wrapping herself in dignity she didn't quite feel. At the door, she paused. "Rhett?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for being gentle." A long silence, then, "You're my wife now, Elena. That means something, even if it's not traditional." She nodded, though he couldn't see it in the darkness, and slipped out into the hallway. Back to her own room, her own bed, her own solitude. Outside, the Montana night stretched endless and cold. Inside, two people tried to convince themselves that survival was enough, that practicality would carry them through, that hearts too damaged to love couldn't possibly betray them by trying. They were both wrong, but they wouldn't realize it until it was almost too late. The pattern established itself with brutal efficiency. 3 nights a week, Rhett would find her after dinner. A glance, a nod toward the stairs, nothing more. Elena would follow, they would fulfill the terms, and then she would retreat to her own room while he remained in his. No conversation beyond the necessary, no lingering, certainly no tenderness beyond what the act itself demanded. During the days, they orbited each other like distant planets, present in the same space, but never quite colliding. He left before dawn, worked until dark, came in for meals she prepared with increasing competence. She managed the house, learned the rhythms of ranch life, kept everything running smoothly in the domestic sphere while he commanded the wild. It should have been enough. It was what they'd agreed to. But by the 3rd week, Elena found herself watching him through windows, found herself listening for his footsteps, learning to read his moods in the set of his shoulders or the tightness around his eyes. Found herself lying awake on the nights he didn't come to her room, wondering why relief felt so much like disappointment. She was supposed to be smarter than this. The first crack in their careful routine came on a Tuesday morning when Elena ventured out to the chicken coop and found a dead hen, its body torn apart by something with claws and hunger. She'd seen death before, her father's long illness, her mother's sudden heart failure, but there was something visceral about this, the violence of nature made manifest in blood and feathers. She was still standing there, fighting nausea, when Rhett appeared beside her. "Fox," he said, examining the damage with clinical efficiency. "Got through the fence somehow. I'll fix it before tonight." "Should I? What do I do with—" "Leave it. I'll handle it." He glanced at her face and something shifted in his expression. "You're pale. Go inside." "I'm fine." "You're not. Go inside, Elena. That's not an order. It's common sense." She wanted to argue, wanted to prove she could handle ranch realities as well as he could, but her stomach had other ideas, and she fled to the house with as much dignity as she could muster. When Rhett came in for lunch, he found her scrubbing the kitchen floor with more force than necessary, working out frustration on innocent wood. "You trying to wear through to China?" "I'm trying to be useful," she snapped, then immediately regretted it. They didn't snap at each other, didn't engage enough to generate that kind of heat. Rhett pulled out a chair, turned it backward, and sat down with his arms crossed over the back. "You want to talk about what's really bothering you?" "I saw a dead chicken. I got queasy. There's nothing to talk about." "That's not what I mean." He studied her with those too perceptive eyes. "You've been here 3 weeks. You keep to your space, I keep to mine. We're polite, efficient, but you're—" He searched for the word. "Restless. Like a horse with burrs under its saddle." Elena sat back on her heels, brush still in hand. "You want honesty?" "Always. I'm bored out of my mind." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "I clean a house that's already clean. I cook meals that take an hour to prepare and 10 minutes to eat. I manage accounts that could be done by a child. I read the same 6 books over and over because that's all I brought. And I wait. Wait for you to decide it's time to fulfill the terms. Wait for some sign that this is—" She stopped, horrified at what she'd almost revealed. Rhett was quiet for a long moment. Then, "What did you do before? Before teaching?" "I read, I wrote. Not well, but I enjoyed it. I studied languages, history, mathematics. I had conversations about ideas, not just weather and cattle prices." "You miss it." "I miss having a mind worth using," she said bitterly. He stood, walked to the window, stood with his back to her. "There's a library in Billings. Not much, but better than 6 books. I go to town once a month for supplies. You could come with me next week. Pick out whatever you want." It was such a small thing, such a simple gesture, but Elena felt tears burn behind her eyes at the unexpected kindness. "Thank you," she managed. "And the accounts. Rhett continued, still not facing her. You said they're too simple. You're right. I've been keeping them basic because I don't have time for details. If you want, you could take them over completely. Payroll, supply orders, tax calculations. It's tedious work, but it requires actual thinking. I'd like that. He turned then, and she saw something in his face she hadn't seen before. Uncertainty, maybe, or the beginning of awareness that their careful boundaries might not be working as well as they'd thought. Elena, I'm not good at this. At seeing what people need beyond the practical. Catherine used to say I was emotionally dense, and she wasn't wrong. But I don't want you to be miserable here. I'm not miserable, she said, and realized it was true. I'm just adjusting, finding my place. Then adjust faster, he said, but there was the faintest hint of a smile. Because watching you scrub floors like you're attacking an enemy is making me nervous. Despite everything, Elena laughed, the sound surprising them both. Rhett's expression softened in a way that made her chest tight. Then he seemed to catch himself, pulled the mask back into place. I should get back to work. There's a section of fence that needs replacing before winter. He left, and Elena stayed on the floor surrounded by soap and water and the strange, fragile feeling that something had just shifted between them. Something small but significant, like the first crack in ice before the thaw. She should have been more careful, should have reinforced her walls instead of letting them weaken. But loneliness is a powerful thing, and so is the human need for connection. Even when you've sworn it off, even when you know better, especially then. The trip to Billings the following week felt like a holiday. Elena dressed in her second-best dress. The green wool was getting worn from constant use, and climbed into the wagon beside Rhett with an excitement she tried hard to hide. The 3-hour ride gave them time to talk in ways they hadn't before. Rhett told her about the early days of the ranch, the setbacks and small victories, the year a blizzard killed half his herd and he'd almost lost everything. She told him about teaching, about the students she'd loved and the parents who'd made her life difficult, about the slow erosion of hope as engagement after engagement fell apart. Thomas, the one who died, he was a good man, she said, watching the landscape roll past. We would have been happy together, I think. Not passionate, but comfortable. Safe. You wanted safe even then? I wanted normal, she corrected. A regular life. Children, a home, a husband who came back at night and talked to me about his day. Instead, I got a series of men who wanted someone softer, prettier, less much. Less much? Too smart, too opinionated, too tall, too serious. Take your pick. I've heard all the complaints. She shrugged, pretending it didn't still sting. Apparently I'm exhausting to be around for extended periods. Rhett made a sound that might have been disagreement. Catherine said something similar about me, said I was exhausting because I never stopped working, never stopped thinking 3 steps ahead. She wanted romance and spontaneity. I gave her 5-year plans and weather predictions. We're quite a pair, Elena said dryly. Yeah. He glanced at her. We really are. In town, Rhett handled his business with characteristic efficiency, while Elena lost herself in the small library. She emerged 2 hours later with an armload of books, philosophy, science, 2 novels, a book on astronomy that made her heart sing just holding it. Rhett took one look at the stack and raised an eyebrow. That should last you until next week. Next month, she corrected. I savor books. I don't devour them. Good thing. Otherwise, I'd be making this trip weekly. But he loaded the books into the wagon carefully, treating them with the same respect he'd give valuable cargo. On the way back, Elena felt lighter than she had since arriving. The books were treasures, yes, but it was more than that. Rhett had seen she was struggling and done something about it. Had given her not just objects, but purpose, engagement, a way to feel like herself again. Thank you, she said as the ranch came into view. For today. For understanding. Don't thank me yet, Rhett said. Wait until you see the account books. They're a mess. You might regret volunteering. But when he showed her the records that evening, ledgers filled with cramped handwriting, calculations that didn't quite add up, receipts stuffed into folders with no organization, Elena felt something close to joy. This was a puzzle, a challenge, something she could fix, improve, make sense of. She dove in immediately, spreading papers across the kitchen table, creating systems and categories while Rhett watched with something that looked like fascination. You're smiling, he said. I'm working. Same thing, apparently. Their eyes met, and for a moment the air between them felt charged with something neither wanted to name. Then Rhett stood abruptly. I'll leave you to it. Don't stay up too late. But Elena worked until midnight, organizing and reorganizing, finding errors and fixing them, creating a system that would actually function. When she finally went to bed, her mind was buzzing with numbers and possibilities instead of the usual loneliness. She slept better that night than she had since the wedding. The next morning, Rhett found her still at the table, having risen before dawn to continue. He stopped in the doorway, coffee cup halfway to his mouth. Did you sleep at all? A few hours. Elena looked up, aware she probably looked wild, hair escaping its pins, ink on her fingers, eyes bright with the kind of focus she hadn't felt in months. Rhett, your previous accountant was either incompetent or stealing from you, probably both. Look at this. She showed him the discrepancies she'd found, the patterns of missing funds, the supply orders that didn't match delivery receipts. Rhett's expression grew darker with each revelation. How much? He asked finally. Over the past 2 years? Nearly $800. He set his coffee down with deliberate care. Who? Man named Horace Garrett, according to the signatures. Ring any bells? He was the previous owner's bookkeeper. Stayed on for 2 years after I bought the place, left last spring. Rhett's jaw clenched. Said he was moving to California. I gave him a good reference, even paid him a bonus. He repaid you by robbing you blind. Elena gathered the evidence. The question is, what do you want to do about it? Rhett was silent for a long time, staring at the papers like they were snakes. Then, nothing. He's gone. The money's gone. Chasing him would cost more than we'd recover. But I learned a valuable lesson about trust, and I have someone I can actually rely on handling the accounts now. He looked at her with something that made her pulse quicken. You found this in one night, Elena. One night. You know what that tells me? That I'm thorough? That I've been underestimating you. He picked up his coffee, took a drink. From now on, you have full authority over ranch finances. Pay the hands, order supplies, manage the budget. I'll sign off on major purchases, but day to day, it's yours. Elena felt something bloom in her chest. Pride, maybe, or purpose regained. You trust me with that? You just proved you're the only person I should trust with it. He paused. Unless you don't want the responsibility. I want it, she said immediately. I want to be useful, to matter. You matter, Rhett said quietly. Then, as if realizing he'd revealed too much, I should get to work. Fence won't fix itself. He left her alone with the ledgers and the morning light and the strange growing awareness that this arrangement of theirs was becoming something neither of them had planned for. Days blurred into weeks. Elena threw herself into managing the ranch's finances with the same intensity she'd once brought to teaching. She caught more errors, negotiated better prices with suppliers, created systems that saved both time and money. The hands started coming to her instead of Rhett for their pay, for advances when emergencies hit, for help with budgeting their own meager salaries. Mrs. Calder's got a head for numbers, she heard Hank tell Jimmy one afternoon. Sharp as any man I've known, and fairer too. The praise shouldn't have mattered so much, but it did. Rhett noticed the changes too, started asking her opinion on purchases, on whether they could afford to hire extra help for the fall cattle drive, on investments and improvements. Their dinners stretched longer as they discussed ranch business, debated strategies, planned for winter. They were becoming partners, not in the way the contract specified, but in ways that felt more dangerous, more real. And still, 3 nights a week, he would find her after dark. Still, they would come together in his bed with mechanical precision. Still, she would leave afterward, both of them pretending it meant nothing beyond the fulfillment of terms. But the pretense was wearing thin. It broke on a cold October night when Elena, returning to her room after one of their encounters, stopped at the top of the stairs. Rhett's door was still open, lamplight spilling into the hallway. She could hear him moving around, the creak of floorboards, the rustle of clothing. She should keep walking, should maintain the boundary. But something made her turn back, made her appear in his doorway without knocking. Rhett looked up from where he sat on the edge of the bed, surprise flickering across his features. Did you forget something? No? Elena stepped inside, closed the door behind her. Can I ask you something? Of course. Do you feel anything when we... She gestured helplessly at the bed. Or is it really just a transaction for you? Rhett went very still. Elena, I need to know. Because I'm trying to keep this clinical, trying to maintain the boundaries we set, but I can't tell if I'm the only one struggling or if you're just better at hiding it. He stood, ran a hand through his hair, the first truly uncertain gesture she'd ever seen from him. You want honesty? I asked for it, didn't I? I feel too much, he said roughly. Every time. Every damn time I tell myself it's just part of the agreement, just something that needs doing. And every time it gets harder to make myself believe it. Elena's breath caught. Then why do we keep pretending? Because the alternative is terrifying. He moved toward her, stopped just out of reach. Elena, I swore I'd never do this again. Never let someone matter, never give anyone the power to destroy me the way Catherine did. This arrangement was supposed to be safe. No feelings, no risk, no life, Elena finished. Just survival. Yes. And you think that's enough? For the next 30, 40 years? You think we can keep living like ghosts in the same house, touching but never connecting, sharing a bed but never actually being together? I don't know, Red admitted, but the alternative, caring about you, needing you, and then losing you, who says you'd lose me? Elena closed the distance between them, her hand finding his chest, feeling his heart hammer beneath her palm. I'm not Catherine. I'm not going to run back east because ranch life is hard. I knew what I was signing up for. Did you? His hand covered hers, holding it against his heartbeat. Because I don't think either of us knew what we were really getting into. No, she agreed. But we're here now. And we can either keep pretending this doesn't mean anything, or we can admit that maybe it means more than we planned. Maybe it means everything. Rhett's other hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with aching gentleness. If I let myself care about you, really care, I won't survive it if you leave. Then don't let me leave, Elena said simply. Choose me. Not because the contract says you have to, but because you want to. For a long moment, they stood frozen in that charged space between old hurts and new possibilities. Then Rhett pulled her against him, his mouth finding hers with a hunger that had nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with need. This kiss wasn't clinical, wasn't transactional. It was desperate and real and terrifying in its honesty. Elena kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his shirt, her body pressed against his like she could absorb his warmth, his strength, his carefully guarded heart. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Rhett rested his forehead against hers. I don't know how to do this, he confessed. How to be a real husband instead of just a contract holder. Then we'll figure it out together, Elena said, like we figure out everything else. What if I'm not enough? What if... Rhett. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. You gave me books. You gave me work that matters. You saw that I was drowning and threw me a lifeline without me having to beg. You think that's not enough? It's not romance. It's not poetry or grand gestures. I don't want poetry. I want partnership. I want someone who sees me as an equal, who respects my mind as well as my... She stopped, felt heat flood her cheeks. You're what? Rhett asked, and there was heat in his eyes now too, but also something softer, something that looked dangerously close to affection. You know what? She muttered. Say it anyway. My body, she forced out. Who respects my mind as well as my body? Who wants both? I do want both, Rhett said quietly. I want your sharp tongue when you're arguing with me about supply costs. I want your smile when you solve a problem in the ledgers. I want your strength, your stubbornness, your refusal to be anything less than exactly who you are. His hands tightened on her waist. And yes, I want this too. But not as a transaction anymore. As something we choose. Something we both want. I want it, Elena whispered. I want you. This time when they came together, it was different, slower, neither of them in a hurry to finish and separate. Rhett took his time, learning her body with a thoroughness that made her shake. Elena explored him with equal fascination, tracing scars, feeling the play of muscle under skin, discovering what made him gasp or groan or grip her harder. And when it was over, when they lay tangled in sheets damp with effort, Rhett didn't let her leave. Pulled her against him instead, his arm heavy across her waist, his breath warm against her neck. "Stay," he said. Not an order, a request, almost a plea. Elena settled into his warmth, her body fitting against his like they'd been designed for this. "I'm not going anywhere. Promise me." "I promise." She felt him relax, the tension draining from his body as sleep pulled at them both. And for the first time since their wedding night, Elena didn't retreat to her own cold bed, didn't maintain the careful distance. She stayed, wrapped in Rhett's arms, and let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they could build something real from the ruins of their broken hearts. Outside, winter crept closer, bringing storms and hardship and all the challenges the frontier could throw at them. But inside, in the darkness of Rhett's room, two people took the first fragile steps towards something that looked remarkably like love, even if neither of them was quite ready to call it that yet. The next morning, Elena woke in Rhett's bed with sunlight streaming through the window and her husband already gone. For a moment, panic seized her. Had last night been a mistake? Had he regretted it and fled? Then she saw the note on the pillow beside her, written in Rhett's cramped handwriting. "Didn't want to wake you. Coffee's on the stove. Take your time." Such a small thing, such a simple gesture. But it meant he'd thought of her comfort, her needs, before leaving for work. Elena smiled, pressed the note to her chest like a talisman, and let herself feel something she hadn't allowed in years: hope. Over the following weeks, their relationship shifted in ways both subtle and profound. They still maintained separate rooms, some boundaries took time to dismantle, but Rhett came to her as often as she went to him. Their nights together grew longer, conversation bleeding into intimacy and back again. They talked about everything and nothing, childhood memories, dreams deferred, fears neither had voiced before. "My father was a hard man," Rhett told her one night, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her bare shoulder. "Rancher, like me. Worked himself to death trying to prove something. I was never quite sure what. When he died, he left my mother with nothing but debt and disappointment. Is that why you're so determined to succeed? To prove you're different? Maybe. Or maybe I'm exactly like him, and that terrifies me more than failure ever could." Elena turned in his arms, her hand finding his face. "You're not your father. You're building something sustainable, not burning yourself out for pride. And you're not alone anymore. You have help." "I have you," he said, and kissed her like she was oxygen. During the days, they worked as a team. Elena's management of the ranch finances freed Rhett to focus on the land and livestock. She caught problems before they became crises, negotiated deals that saved them money, created efficiencies that impressed even Hank. "Boss is different lately," she overheard the old hand tell Jimmy one afternoon. "Smiles more. Doesn't snap as much. Good influence, that wife of his." Elena ducked her head to hide her pleasure, but she couldn't stop the warmth spreading through her chest. Not everything was smooth. They still fought, sharp, quick arguments about money or priorities, or Rhett's tendency to make decisions without consulting her. But they learned to fight fair, to listen as well as argue, to compromise instead of retreat into cold silence. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met," Rhett told her after one particularly heated debate about whether to invest in new breeding stock. "And you're the most controlling man," Elena shot back. "But I'm right about this. The long-term return outweighs the short-term cost." He studied the numbers she'd laid out, his jaw working. Finally, "Fine. But if this fails, it won't. But if it does, you have to admit I was right for an entire week. Deal. And when it succeeds, you have to admit I'm smarter than you." "You're already smarter than me," Rhett said, pulling her into his arms despite her ink-stained fingers and disheveled hair. "That's never been in question." By November, Elena realized she'd stopped counting the days since their wedding, stopped marking time until she could leave or until the arrangement ended. This was her life now, managing accounts in the morning, preparing meals at noon, working alongside Rhett in the evening as they planned for winter. And the nights. The nights were becoming her favorite part, when the work was done and the house was quiet, and Rhett would find her wherever she was reading or working and pull her against him with a hunger that never seemed to diminish. "What did you do to me?" he asked one night, his voice rough against her neck. "I used to be disciplined, controlled. Now all I think about is getting back to you." "Same thing you did to me," Elena whispered. "Made me want to live again instead of just survive." The first snow came in late November, blanketing the ranch in white silence. Elena stood at the kitchen window watching it fall, marveling at the beauty and isolation. They were truly cut off now until spring. Just her, Rhett, and the handful of hands who wintered at the ranch. Rhett came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. They stood like that for long minutes, watching the world transform. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. Elena leaned back into his warmth. "Not a single one." "Not even the cold? The isolation? Being stuck with me for months?" "Especially not that last part." She turned in his arms, her hands sliding up his chest. "Although I reserve the right to change my mind if you keep leaving your boots in the middle of the floor. And I reserve the right to complain about finding your books on every available surface. Then we're even." "Not quite." Rhett's expression grew serious. "Elena, I need to tell you something." Her heart stuttered. "What?" "The contract, the agreement we signed." He took a breath. "I want to burn it. Not because you've fulfilled the terms, though for all we know, you might have, but because it doesn't represent what this is anymore. What we are." "What are we?" Elena asked, hardly daring to breathe. "I don't know what to call it," Rhett admitted, "but it's not a business arrangement. It's not a transaction. It's everything," Elena finished. "It's everything." "Yes." His hands cupped her face with aching tenderness. "I know I'm not romantic. I know I'm difficult and damaged, and probably not what you deserved. But I love you, Elena. I think I have for weeks now. I was just too scared to admit it." The words hung between them, enormous and fragile. Elena felt tears slip down her cheeks, not sadness, but overwhelming relief. "Say something," Rhett urged, anxiety creeping into his voice. "Because I just handed you my heart, and the suspense is killing me." "I love you too," Elena said through her tears. "I've been trying not to, trying to keep it safe and clinical, like we agreed, but I can't." "I love you," Rhett called her. "Your stubbornness and your hidden gentleness and the way you see me as an equal instead of an ornament." "You are my equal," Rhett said fiercely. "My partner. My—" She kissed him before he could finish, pouring everything she felt into that contact. He kissed her back with matching intensity, lifting her off her feet, carrying her toward the stairs. "Middle of the day," Elena protested weakly. "Don't care. The hands know to handle things without me." "Rhett." "Elena." He stopped halfway up the stairs, his eyes blazing. "I just told you I love you for the first time in 12 years. I'm not wasting another second pretending I don't want you every moment of every day." So she stopped protesting and let him carry her to bed, where they loved each other with the kind of passion that came from finally being honest about what they felt. Afterward, tangled in sheets with afternoon light slanting through the window, Elena traced the scar over Rhett's eyebrow. "How did you get this?" "Horse kicked me when I was 19. Probably deserved it. I was being careless." "And this one?" Her finger moved to a long scar on his ribs. "Barbed wire, first year at the ranch. Taught me to be more careful with fencing. You're a collection of lessons learned the hard way. Aren't we all?" Rhett caught her hand, kissed her palm. "What about your scars, the ones I can't see?" Elena was quiet for a moment. Then, 3 failed engagements. Each one taught me I wasn't enough, wasn't soft enough, quiet enough, simple enough. I learned to make myself smaller, to hide how much I cared about ideas and learning. But it never worked. They always found someone else. "Their loss," Rhett said again, but with more vehemence this time. "And my gain. Because I don't want small or simple. I want exactly who you are, sharp and strong and too smart for your own good. Not too smart for you, apparently. Way too smart for me," he corrected. "But I'm smart enough to recognize a miracle when I find one." They spent the rest of the afternoon in bed, talking and touching and building the intimacy they'd denied themselves for so long. When evening came, Rhett finally let her go long enough to dress and prepare dinner. As Elena worked in the kitchen, she realized she was humming. Actually humming like a woman in love. Because she was in love. Desperately, completely, terrifyingly in love with her husband. The man who'd bought her like property and then given her freedom. Who'd offered her a transaction and delivered partnership. Who'd promised nothing and given her everything. When Rhett came in for dinner, she met him at the door and kissed him thoroughly. not caring that she had flour on her hands or that the stew was probably burning. "What was that for?" he asked when they finally broke apart. "For being you, for seeing me, for making this—" She gestured at the house, the ranch, them, into something real. "It's always been real," Rhett said quietly. "I was just too stubborn to admit it." They ate dinner by lamplight, talking about plans for spring, about the breeding stock Elena had insisted on, about possibly adding a wing to the house if they needed more space. "For what?" Elena asked, though her heart knew the answer. "For children, eventually, when it happens naturally instead of by schedule." Rhett reached across the table, took her hand. "If it happens, and if it doesn't, we'll still have each other. That's enough." It was more than enough. It was everything. That night, Elena didn't even pretend to go to her own room. She followed Rhett upstairs, climbed into his bed like she belonged there, because she did, and fell asleep wrapped in his arms while snow fell softly outside, and the future stretched before them, uncertain, but together. They'd started as strangers bound by contract. They'd become partners through necessity. And now, finally, they were becoming what neither had dared hope for. Two people choosing each other every day, despite their scars and fears and the harsh reality of frontier life. The transaction was over. The marriage, the real one, was just beginning. Winter settled over Broken Creek like a fist closing. The snow that had seemed beautiful in November became relentless by December, piling in drifts that reached the porch railings and turned the simplest tasks into battles against nature. The hands worked double shifts, keeping livestock fed and sheltered, breaking ice on water troughs, digging paths between buildings that would fill again by morning. Elena learned quickly that ranch life in winter wasn't romantic. It was survival with better company. She woke before dawn now, not because Rhett demanded it, but because she couldn't stand lying in bed while he worked himself ragged. She'd bundle into layers of wool and follow him out to help with whatever needed doing, ignoring his protests that she should stay warm inside. "You're not built for this," he argued one bitter morning, his breath fogging in the air as they hauled feed to the horses. "Neither were you originally," Elena shot back, her fingers numb despite thick gloves. "You built yourself for it. So can I." Stubborn woman. "You say that like it's news." But she caught the flicker of pride in his eyes before he turned away, and it warmed her more than any fire could. The isolation pressed in as January arrived. No trips to town, no visitors, just the endless white landscape and the handful of people trapped together on 6,000 acres. Elena had worried the confinement would strain their still new intimacy, that Rhett would retreat into the emotional distance that had defined their early weeks together. Instead, the opposite happened. Forced into close quarters with nowhere to hide, they learned each other with an intensity that might have been uncomfortable if it hadn't felt so necessary. She discovered he was quietest in the mornings, needed coffee before conversation, got a particular crease between his eyebrows when he was working through a problem. He learned she talked to herself when she was deep in the account books, that she had nightmares sometimes about being alone, that his touch could settle her faster than any words. They fought too. Proximity guaranteed it. Rhett's need for control clashed with Elena's refusal to be managed. She pushed when he wanted space. He withdrew when she needed engagement. Their arguments could be vicious, both of them too intelligent, too wounded, too skilled with words to fight gently. "You don't get to make decisions about the house without consulting me," Elena snapped during one particularly heated exchange in late January. "This is my domain, Rhett. You said so yourself. And you don't get to countermand my orders to the hands," he fired back. "I run this ranch, not you. I gave Jimmy an advance because his sister is sick and needs medicine. That's not countermanding anything. That's basic human decency. It's undermining my authority. They need to come to me for advances, not you." "Why? Because you're the man? Because I'm just the wife who should stay in her place?" Rhett's eyes flashed dangerously. "That's not what I said. It's what you meant. The hell it is. This has nothing to do with you being a woman and everything to do with maintaining clear lines of command. If the hands think they can play us against each other, they don't think that. They think I'm more approachable than you, which I am, because you intimidate them half to death with your granite face and cold stares." "My what?" "Your face. You look like you're carved from stone most of the time. No wonder they're afraid to ask you for help." Rhett stared at her, jaw working, Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, a short, sharp bark of sound. Granite face? Yes. Very intimidating, very immovable. And you're not intimidated? I'm terrified of you, Elena said honestly. Just not in the way you think. That stopped him. What do you mean? She crossed her arms, suddenly vulnerable. I'm terrified of how much I've come to need you, how much power you have to hurt me if you decide this was a mistake after all. The anger drained from Rhett's expression, replaced by something raw. He closed the distance between them, his hands finding her shoulders. Elena, look at me. She did reluctantly. This is not a mistake. You're not a mistake. And I'm sorry. I'm terrible at sharing control because for 12 years I've had to make every decision alone. But you're right. About Jimmy, about me being too hard to approach, about all of it. I'll do better. I shouldn't have said you were undermining. You should have. Because I was. He pulled her against him, his chin resting on top of her head. We're still learning this. How to be partners instead of separate. It's going to be messy sometimes. I don't mind messy, Elena said into his chest. I mind feeling like I don't matter. You matter more than anything, Rhett said fiercely. More than the ranch, more than my pride. I just forget sometimes that you don't know that. They stood like that for a long moment, anger dissolving into the deeper truth of what they'd built together. When Elena pulled back, she saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the fear that matched her own. Tell me again, she said softly. What? That I matter. You matter, Rhett repeated, his hands framing her face. You're everything, the only thing that makes any of this worthwhile. She kissed him then, pouring forgiveness and need and love into the contact. He responded with matching hunger, backing her against the wall, his body pinning hers in a way that felt like safety instead of confinement. The hands could come in, Elena gasped when his mouth moved to her neck. Don't care. Rhett. They know better than to interrupt. His hands found the buttons of her dress. And I need you, right now, right here. So she stopped protesting and let him take her against the wall in the middle of the afternoon, both of them desperate and demanding, chasing pleasure and connection and the reassurance that they were still solid, still together, still choosing each other despite the fights and fears. Afterward, disheveled and breathless, they straightened their clothes in charged silence. We can't keep doing this, Elena said, though she was smiling. Doing what? Fighting or making up? Both. Either. I don't know anymore. Rhett tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his expression soft in a way it only ever was with her. I'll take the fights if it means I get the making up too. Even when I'm being unreasonable? Especially then. You're magnificent when you're angry. Despite everything, Elena laughed. You're insane. Probably, but I'm yours. The words settled between them, simple and true. He was hers. She was his. And somehow, impossibly, that was becoming enough. February brought a break in the weather, a week of temperatures that rose above freezing and turned snow to slush. Rhett used the opportunity to ride the fence lines, checking for damage from the winter storms. Elena insisted on coming with him, needing to escape the house even if it meant hours in the saddle on terrain that challenged her still-developing riding skills. You don't have to prove anything, Rhett said as he saddled her horse, a gentle mare named Dove. I'm not proving anything. I'm going stir-crazy and need to see something beyond these four walls. He understood that, gave her a leg up, checked her stirrups, handed her the reins with the kind of careful attention that made her heart squeeze. They rode out in comfortable silence, Rhett pointing out landmarks, explaining the geography of his empire. The ranch stretched farther than Elena had realized. Thousands of acres of rolling prairie, stands of pine, a creek that gave the property its name cutting through the valley. It's beautiful, she said, taking in the vast sweep of land under clearing skies. It's brutal, Rhett corrected. But yeah, beautiful too. They found the first break in the fence around noon, posts snapped by the weight of drifted snow, wire sagging uselessly. Rhett dismounted with a curse, examining the damage. Can you fix it? Elena asked. Not properly, not without more materials than I brought. He stood, scanning the area. I'll mark it. Come back tomorrow with supplies and one of the hands. But when they reached the next section, they found worse damage. An entire stretch of fence down, and cattle from a neighboring ranch grazing on Calder land. Rhett's expression turned thunderous. Damn it. Whose cattle? Marcus Brennan's. He owns the property to the east. Rhett mounted in one fluid motion. Come on, we need to drive them back before they get comfortable here. What followed was 2 hours of hard riding as they herded the wayward cattle back toward the border. Elena discovered muscles she didn't know she had, all of them screaming by the time they'd pushed the last steer through the gap and watched it lumber away. You did good, Rhett said, and she heard genuine admiration in his voice. I'm going to be sore for a week. Probably, but you kept up, didn't complain. That's more than some ranch hands I've hired. The praise warmed her despite the cold seeping through her layers. They were turning back toward home when riders appeared on the horizon, 3 men on horseback moving fast. Rhett's hand went to the rifle on his saddle. Stay behind me. What's wrong? Those are Brennan's men, and they're not coming for a friendly chat. The riders pulled up 20 feet away. The leader was a thick-shouldered man with a face like weathered leather and eyes that assessed Elena with open contempt before dismissing her entirely. Calder, saw you driving our cattle off your land. Your fence is down, Rhett said evenly. Your cattle wandered. I was returning them. You're welcome, by the way. Fence was fine last week. Well, it's not fine now. Check it yourself if you don't believe me. The man, Brennan himself, Elena realized, leaned forward in his saddle. Funny how your fence goes down just when you're out riding with your new wife. Almost like you're looking for excuses to poach. Watch your mouth, Rhett said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. Or what? You gonna start a war over some fence posts? I'm gonna finish one if you keep implying I'm a thief. The tension ratcheted up, all 3 of Brennan's men shifting in their saddles, hands drifting toward weapons. Elena's heart hammered. This was going to turn violent. She could feel it in the air, thick and electric. Gentlemen, she said, and was proud when her voice came out steady. Surely this can be resolved without threats. The fence is down. That's a fact, not an accusation. Mr. Brennan, you're welcome to inspect it yourself. We have no interest in your cattle. We simply returned what had wandered onto our property. Brennan's attention swung to her, his expression contemptuous. Nobody asked you, sweetheart. Nevertheless, I'm talking. Elena met his gaze without flinching. My husband has 6,000 acres and more cattle than he needs. Why would he risk his reputation and his ranch to steal a few head from a neighbor? Use your head instead of your pride. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then Brennan laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. You let your woman talk for you now, Calder? She's making more sense than you are, Rhett said. And she's right. Check the fence. You'll see I'm not lying. Then fix it, or I'll send you a bill for every head that comes through onto my land. Brennan spat into the snow. You've changed. Time was. You'd have settled this with fists, not words. Time was. I was young and stupid, Rhett said. Now I'm married and smarter. Choose which version you want to deal with. Another tense silence. Then Brennan jerked his head at his men. Let's go, but Calder, you better hope that fence was really down by accident, because if I find out otherwise... You won't, Rhett said flatly. Because it was. The 3 men wheeled their horses and rode off, kicking up slush. Rhett didn't move until they disappeared over the rise. Then he turned to Elena, his expression unreadable. That was either very brave or very stupid. I was trying to prevent you from getting shot, Elena said, adrenaline making her hands shake now that the danger had passed. You could have gotten yourself shot. He wasn't going to shoot a woman. Men like that have too much pride. You don't know that? You don't know him. Rhett ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. Elena, out here, disputes get settled with violence more often than words. You can't just step into the middle of that. I just did. And you could have gotten hurt. Or worse. He grabbed her arms, his grip tight enough to be uncomfortable. Do you have any idea what that would do to me? If something happened to you because you were trying to protect me? The same thing that would happen to me if something happened to you, Elena shot back. Which is why I spoke up. Because I refuse to stand by quietly while you start a war over fence posts and cattle. It's not about fence posts, it's about respect, territory. Brennan's been pushing boundaries for years, and today he basically called me a liar and a thief. And you responded with dignity instead of violence. That took more strength than throwing punches would have. Rhett stared at her, jaw working. Then suddenly, he pulled her against him, his arms crushing her in an embrace that spoke of fear as much as anger. "Don't do that again, please. I can handle Brennan. I can't handle losing you." Elena wrapped her arms around him, feeling the rapid beat of his heart against her cheek. "You're not going to lose me, but you're also not going to face things alone anymore. That's what marriage means. We face things together. Even when it's dangerous, especially then." He held her for a long moment, neither of them speaking. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were fierce. "You're going to age me before my time." "Good. Then we'll be old together." Despite everything, Rhett smiled. "Come on, let's get home before we freeze to death out here." They rode back in silence, but Elena noticed Rhett kept glancing at her, his expression a mixture of exasperation and something that looked remarkably like pride. When they reached the barn and dismounted, he caught her hand before she could walk away. "What you did today, stepping in like that, it was reckless." "I know." "And impressive." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "Most women would have stayed quiet. Let the men handle it." "I'm not most women." "No," Rhett agreed, pulling her close. "You're definitely not. You're mine, and you're terrifying." Elena laughed against his chest. "Is that a compliment?" "The highest one I know how to give." That night, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Rhett traced the line of her spine with gentle fingers. "I meant what I said earlier, about being scared of losing you." "I know. I don't think you do." He was quiet for a moment, gathering words. "When Catherine left, it nearly destroyed me. I was young, thought I was in love, believed we were building something permanent. When she walked away, it felt like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. I swore I'd never let anyone have that kind of power over me again." Elena turned in his arms, her hand finding his face in the darkness. "And now you have more power over me than she ever did. Because what I feel for you is real, not infatuation or projection or wishful thinking. It's," he struggled for the word, "necessary, like breathing, and that terrifies me, because if you left—" "I'm not leaving," Elena said fiercely. "How many times do I have to tell you? I chose this, I chose you, not because I had no other options, but because I wanted you, want you, present tense, ongoing. Even when I'm controlling and difficult?" "Even then. Maybe especially then, because those are the moments when you need me most." Rhett kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her mouth. Gentle kisses that spoke of tenderness rather than passion. "I don't deserve you." "You're right," Elena agreed. "You deserve someone easier, more agreeable, less likely to argue with you about everything." "That sounds horrible." "Exactly. So you're stuck with me." "Good," Rhett said, and there was satisfaction in his voice. "Because I'm not letting you go, ever. Even when you're old and gray and still arguing with me about fence repairs." "Especially then," Elena murmured, sleep pulling at her. "Someone has to keep you honest." She felt him smile against her hair, felt the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm, and let herself drift off wrapped in the certainty that this, them, was real. Imperfect and complicated and sometimes terrifying, but real. The confrontation with Brennan marked a shift in how the neighboring ranchers saw them. Word spread that Calder's new wife had tongue-lashed Brennan into backing down, that she wasn't some timid eastern flower but a woman with spine and brains. When Rhett took her to town in early March for the first time since their wedding, Elena found herself the object of intense curiosity. The women whispered behind gloved hands, their eyes assessing everything from her dress to her posture to the way she walked beside Rhett like an equal instead of 3 steps behind. The men tipped their hats with new respect, some of them even addressing her directly instead of speaking through Rhett. "Mrs. Calder, heard you put Marcus Brennan in his place. About time someone did." "Mrs. Calder, your husband says you're handling the ranch accounts now. That true? Might need to borrow your expertise for my own books." Elena fielded the comments with as much grace as she could muster, aware that she was being evaluated, weighed, judged against some invisible standard of frontier womanhood. Rhett noticed her discomfort, leaned down to whisper, "You're doing fine, they're just curious." "They're wondering if I'm worth keeping," Elena murmured back. "They already know you are. Why do you think they're being so polite?" Out here, respect is earned, not given. You earned it. The words settled something anxious in her chest. She straightened her shoulders and met the next curious gaze with confidence instead of uncertainty. At the general store, while Rhett dealt with supply orders, Elena found herself cornered by three ranch wives, weathered women with capable hands and assessing eyes. "You're different from what we expected," the oldest one said. Her name was Margaret, wife to a rancher who controlled land north of Broken Creek. "When we heard Calder had married, we figured he'd found some desperate widow or mail-order bride who'd do whatever he said." "I am a desperate mail-order bride," Elena said honestly, "but I don't do whatever he says. We're partners." The women exchanged glances. Then Margaret smiled, a real smile, warm and approving. "Good. Man like Rhett Calder needs a partner, not a doormat. He's too much himself to be comfortable with anything less." "He is very much himself," Elena agreed dryly. "And you're very much yourself," another woman, Sarah, added. "That's rare out here. Most women either break or bend themselves into shapes they don't recognize. You look like you're staying whole." "I'm trying," Elena said. "Some days are easier than others." "That's all any of us can do," Margaret said. "Try. And hold on when it gets hard." She hesitated, then added, "If you need anything, company, advice, help, you're welcome at my place. We're not that far from Broken Creek, and winters are long. It helps to have other women to talk to." The offer surprised Elena with its generosity. "Thank you, I'd like that." When she told Rhett about the conversation on the ride home, he looked pleased. Margaret's good people. Tough as nails, but fair. If she's extending friendship, take it. You'll need allies out here. "I have you." "You do, but you need more than just me. I'm not good at—" He gestured vaguely. "Female things. Friendship and conversation and whatever else women need. Margaret can give you that." Elena studied his profile, the way he focused intently on the road ahead. "You're giving me permission to have friends?" "I'm saying I know my limitations." He glanced at her. "I can give you partnership, respect, love, but I can't give you everything you need, and I'm smart enough to recognize that." "That might be the most emotionally intelligent thing you've ever said." "Don't get used to it. I'm usually much less evolved." But Elena heard the vulnerability beneath the joke. Rhett was trying, really trying, to be more than the isolated, emotionally closed man he'd been when she arrived. It didn't always work. He still withdrew sometimes, still struggled to express feelings beyond the physical, but the effort mattered more than perfection. Spring arrived slowly, reluctantly, as if winter was fighting to maintain its grip. The snow melted in patches, revealing muddy earth and the promise of new growth. The hands emerged from winter hibernation with renewed energy, ready to tackle calving season and all the chaos that came with it. Elena threw herself into the work, learning to help with difficult births, to bottle feed orphaned calves, to track which cows needed watching. It was exhausting, messy, sometimes heartbreaking work, but it was also purposeful in a way that made her feel essential rather than ornamental. "You're a natural," Hank told her one afternoon as she successfully coaxed a stubborn calf to nurse. "Most ranch wives want nothing to do with the bloody parts." "Most ranch wives probably weren't desperate enough to marry strangers," Elena said, though there was no bitterness in it anymore. Just acknowledgement of truth. "Maybe, but desperation doesn't make you good with animals. That's something else. Something you either have or you don't." He tipped his hat. "You have it, Mrs. Calder. The boss is lucky." When she told Rhett about the conversation that night, he pulled her into his lap despite her protests about being filthy from the barn. "Hank's right. I am lucky." "You're also going to need to wash these clothes," Elena pointed out. "I'm covered in things I don't want to identify." "Don't care." He nuzzled her neck, ignoring her half-hearted attempts to escape. "You smell like hard work and cattle. It's attractive." "You have a very strange definition of attractive." "I have a very specific definition of attractive, and it looks exactly like you, covered in mud and stubborn determination, refusing to give up on a calf that any sensible person would have abandoned." Elena stopped struggling, let herself relax against him. "I couldn't let it die. Not when there was still a chance." "I know. That's who you are." Rhett's arms tightened around her. "You don't give up. On calves, on ledgers that don't make sense, on difficult husbands who don't know how to say what they feel." "You're getting better at saying what you feel." Only because you won't let me get away with silence anymore. It was true. Elena had made it her mission to draw Rhett out, to make him articulate the emotions he'd spent years suppressing. It frustrated him. She could see it in the way his jaw would clench, the way he'd search for words that didn't come naturally. But he tried. And every time he managed to voice something difficult, something real, the space between them grew more solid. By late April, the ranch was alive with new calves and new growth, everything bursting with the kind of energy that came after months of dormancy. Elena stood at the fence one evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, and felt something shift inside her. She'd been so focused on surviving, on adapting, on proving she could handle ranch life, that she hadn't noticed when survival became living, when duty became choice, when the arrangement became a marriage she actually wanted. Rhett found her there, wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about? How different everything is from when I arrived. How different I am." "Better or worse?" "Better," Elena said without hesitation. "Harder, definitely, but better. More real." "You were always real," Rhett said. "You just couldn't see it yet." They stood like that as darkness claimed the sky. Two people who'd started as strangers and become something more complex than either had anticipated. The contract that had brought them together was long forgotten, burned in the fireplace weeks ago in a symbolic gesture that had felt both necessary and terrifying. Now they were bound by something stronger than legal agreements. By choice, by partnership, by the slow accumulation of shared moments that had built into something that looked remarkably like a life. "Rhett," Elena said softly. "Yeah? I think I might be pregnant." She felt him go absolutely still behind her. Then, "You think?" "I'm late. Not by much, but enough to notice. And I've been feeling—" She searched for the word. "Different. It might be nothing. Or it might be everything." Rhett turned her gently to face him, his hands framing her face, his eyes searching hers in the fading light. "How do you feel about it? If it's true?" "Terrified," Elena admitted, "and happy, and completely unprepared, all at the same time." "That makes two of us." But Rhett was smiling, actually smiling, with an openness she rarely saw. "A baby. Our baby. Not because a contract said we should, but because we're married and in love, and this is what happens. We don't know for sure yet, but we will. Soon." He pulled her close, and she could feel his heart racing as fast as hers. "Elena, if you are pregnant, if we're really going to be parents, I promise you, I will do everything I can to be the father my father never was, to be present, to be there." "I know you will," Elena said, believing it completely. "We'll figure it out together, like we figure out everything." "Together?" Rhett agreed, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her eyes sting with tears. The future was uncertain. Parenthood would bring challenges they couldn't anticipate, stress their still developing relationship in ways they couldn't predict. But standing there in the gathering darkness with Rhett's arms around her and the possibility of new life growing inside her, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Pure, uncomplicated, terrifying hope. They'd come so far from that first awkward meeting in a Billings hotel, from the cold transaction that had brought them together, from the careful boundaries and emotional distance that had defined their early weeks. Now they stood on the edge of something new, something neither had dared imagine when they signed those papers and spoke those hollow vows. They stood on the edge of becoming a family, messy and imperfect and real. And for the first time in her life, Elena wasn't afraid of what came next. The confirmation came 3 weeks later from the doctor in Billings, a stern-faced woman named Dr. Harriet Walsh, who'd seen enough frontier births to be unsentimental about the whole process. "You're pregnant, Mrs. Calder, about 2 months along, I'd estimate. Due sometime in December, if all goes well." If all goes well. The qualifier hung in the air like smoke. Elena had heard enough stories about childbirth gone wrong, about women who didn't survive, babies who came too early or too late, or not at all. The frontier didn't forgive weakness, and pregnancy was nothing if not a prolonged state of vulnerability. Rhett, who'd insisted on coming into the examination room despite Dr. Walsh's raised eyebrows, gripped Elena's hand so tightly she felt her bones compress. What does she need to do? To stay healthy? To make sure... He couldn't finish the sentence. Dr. Walsh's expression softened fractionally. The usual precautions. No heavy lifting, plenty of rest, good food. And for heaven's sake, Mr. Calder, don't let her work herself to exhaustion the way most ranch wives do. I've seen too many women lose babies because they tried to prove they could handle everything. She won't, Rhett said firmly. I'll make sure of it. Elena opened her mouth to argue, then caught the fear in his eyes. This wasn't about control. It was about terror. He was scared, genuinely scared in a way she'd never seen before. I'll be careful, she promised. But I'm not made of glass. I can still work. Light work, Dr. Walsh said. Nothing that risks falls or injuries. And if you start bleeding or have severe pain, you get back here immediately. Understood? Understood, Elena agreed, though the list of restrictions was already making her anxious. What counted as heavy lifting? What was light work on a ranch where everything was physical? On the ride home, Rhett was quieter than usual, his jaw set in that way that meant he was thinking too hard about something. Talk to me, Elena said finally. I'm trying to figure out how to keep you safe without making you feel like a prisoner. That's a good instinct, but I'm also terrified, Rhett admitted. My mother had 4 pregnancies after me. 3 of them ended badly. I watched my father become a harder, colder man with each loss. Watched my mother fade a little more each time until there was barely anything left of the woman she'd been. Elena hadn't known that. He'd never talked about his mother beyond the briefest mentions. I'm sorry. That must have been horrible to witness. It was. And now I'm watching you carry our child, and all I can think about is what if history repeats? What if I lose you? What if— Stop, Elena interrupted gently. Rhett, look at me. He did, reluctantly, pulling the wagon to a halt. I'm not your mother. Dr. Walsh said I'm healthy. Yes, things can go wrong. They can always go wrong. But living in fear of what might happen isn't going to protect either of us. It's just going to make us miserable. I know that intellectually, but emotionally, he shook his head. I'm not good at this, at having something I can't control. You can't control anything, Elena pointed out. Not really. The weather, the cattle, the ranch, all of it can change in an instant. The only thing you can control is how you respond. When did you get so wise? I've always been this wise. You're just now noticing. Despite his fear, Rhett smiled. Fair point. He picked up the reins again. But I'm still going to worry. And I'm still going to make sure you rest more, eat better, and don't lift anything heavier than a book. Books can be quite heavy, Elena said primly, especially the astronomy one. You know what I mean. She did, and she also knew that fighting him on this would be pointless. Rhett's protectiveness came from love, not condescension. She could work with that. The news spread through the ranch faster than wildfire. By the time they returned, all 5 hands were waiting by the barn, trying to look casual and failing miserably. Congratulations, boss, ma'am, Hank said, hat in hands. We heard from Jimmy, who heard from Pete, who heard from, well, anyway, a baby. That's good news. How did you hear before we got back? Rhett demanded. Telegraph operator's wife is cousins with Doc Walsh's nurse, Jimmy supplied helpfully. News travels fast. Rhett muttered something uncomplimentary about small-town gossip, but Elena saw the pride beneath his irritation. He was happy about this. Scared, yes, but genuinely happy. Thank you, she said to the gathered men. We're pleased about it, too. If you need anything, Mrs. Calder, anything at all, you just holler, Scar said, and the others nodded agreement. We can handle more around here. You focus on staying healthy. The genuine care in their voices surprised Elena. These rough men who'd been strangers 6 months ago had become something like family. They looked out for each other, and now they were extending that protection to her and the baby. I appreciate that, she said. Though I'm not an invalid, I can still pull my weight. Nobody said you couldn't, Hank replied. But there's pulling your weight and there's being stubborn about accepting help. First one's admirable, second one's just foolish. Rhett made a sound that might have been agreement. Elena shot him a look that promised they'd discuss this later. That night, as they lay in bed, Rhett's hand spread possessively over her still flat stomach. I can't feel anything yet, he said. You won't for a while. Months, probably. Does it feel different? For you? Elena considered. Not physically, not yet. But knowing there's something growing in there. She covered his hand with hers. It's strange. Like I'm not just myself anymore. I'm us. All three of us. I like that, Rhett said quietly. Us. A family. We were already a family. This just makes it more official. Were we? He propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her in the lamplight. I mean, I know we're married, but family feels like something different, something more. What does it feel like to you? Rhett was quiet for a long moment, gathering thoughts. Like having people who don't leave, who stay even when things are hard, who choose to be there, not because they have to, but because they want to. His hand tightened on her stomach. I never had that growing up. My father was there physically, but not really present. My mother was worn down by life and loss. And Catherine, he stopped. Catherine left, Elena finished. Yeah, so I learned that people don't stay. They endure for a while, then they find something better and go. But you, he met her eyes. You stayed when you didn't have to, when the arrangement became real, when things got complicated, when you could have asked me to send you back to Billings with enough money to start over somewhere else. You stayed. Because I wanted to, Elena said. Because somewhere between that first awkward dinner and now, this became my life. My home. My choice. Even with a baby coming? Even knowing how dangerous it is out here, how hard it's going to be? Especially with a baby coming. She pulled his face down to hers. Rhett, I'm not scared of hard work or danger. I'm only scared of doing it alone. And I'm not alone anymore. I have you. He kissed her then, deep and searching, and she tasted his fear and hope and desperate love all mixed together. When they made love that night, it was with a tenderness that bordered on reverence, Rhett treating her like something precious that might shatter if handled roughly. Afterward, he held her close, his breathing gradually evening out towards sleep. But Elena stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of responsibility settling over her like a blanket. She'd meant what she said about not being scared. But that wasn't entirely true. She was terrified, not of the work or the danger, but of failing, of not being enough, of losing this baby the way Rhett's mother had lost 3, and watching it break him the way it had broken his father. The pregnancy changed everything and nothing. Rhett became impossibly protective, appearing at her elbow whenever she tried to lift something heavier than a dishcloth, insisting she rest in the afternoons, monitoring what she ate with the intensity he usually reserved for cattle health. I'm pregnant, not dying, Elena snapped one afternoon when he tried to take a basket of laundry from her hands. Dr. Walsh said no heavy lifting. This weighs maybe 10 pounds. I think I can manage. Elena, Rhett, I love you, but if you don't let me do something useful, I'm going to lose my mind. I can't just sit around reading and resting for 7 more months. I'll go crazy. He looked torn, clearly wanting to wrap her in cotton wool, but recognizing she had a point. Then what do you want to do? I want to keep managing the accounts. I want to help with the garden. And before you object, gardening is not heavy lifting. I want to cook dinner because it makes me feel normal. And yes, sometimes I want to carry a basket of laundry without you materializing out of thin air to take it from me. I just want to keep you safe. I know, and I appreciate it. But safe and smothered are different things. She set the basket down, moved to him, wrapped her arms around his waist. I need you to trust that I know my limits, that I'll ask for help when I need it. Can you do that? Rhett pulled her close, his chin resting on top of her head. I can try, but it goes against every instinct I have. Most worthwhile things do. He laughed, short and sharp. You're going to be insufferable about this, aren't you? Absolutely. It's one of my best qualities. They found a compromise. Elena continued managing the household and accounts, but agreed to let the hands take over anything that required prolonged standing or heavy lifting. She worked in the garden mornings when it was cool, rested in the afternoons, and spent evenings with Rhett going over ranch business and planning for the future. As spring turned to summer, her body began to change in ways both fascinating and frustrating. Her dresses grew tight around the middle. Her breasts became tender, her emotions unpredictable. She cried over a broken dish, then laughed at herself for crying, then cried harder because she was being ridiculous. Rhett navigated these mood swings with surprising grace, learning when to offer comfort and when to give her space, when to take her seriously and when to recognize she just needed to vent. "I'm a mess," Elena wailed one evening after burning dinner and dissolving into tears over it. "You're pregnant," Rhett corrected, pulling her into his lap despite her protests. "And beautiful. And carrying our child. A burned roast doesn't change any of that. I used to be competent." "You're still competent. You reorganized the entire account system last week. You negotiated better prices with 3 different suppliers. You helped Jimmy figure out his budget so he could send money home to his sister. That's all very competent." "I burned dinner," Elena repeated stubbornly. "So we'll eat bread and cheese. It's not a tragedy." He kissed her temple. "Elena, you're allowed to be human, to make mistakes, to have days when things don't go perfectly." "You don't." "Like hell I don't. Last week I miscalculated feed supplies and we nearly ran short. 2 weeks ago I lost my temper with Pete over something minor and had to apologize. Last month I— "Okay, I get it," Elena interrupted. "You're human too." "Exactly. So maybe we can both be imperfect together and stop expecting ourselves to be flawless all the time." It was such a reasonable statement, delivered with such sincerity, that Elena felt her tears dry up. "When did you become the emotionally mature one in this relationship?" "About 5 minutes ago. Don't get used to it." By July, Elena's pregnancy was visible to anyone who looked. Her dresses had to be let out, and Margaret, true to her word about friendship, came by with fabric and helped her sew new ones with room to grow. "You're carrying well?" the older woman said, pins in her mouth, as she marked him lengths. "Some women look miserable from month 3 onward. You've got a glow about you." "I feel like a cow," Elena said honestly. Margaret laughed. "That's normal too. But trust me, you look good, healthy, happy even." She paused in her pinning. "Rhett treating you right?" "He's wonderful. Overbearing sometimes, but wonderful." "That's love on a ranch. We show it by trying to do everything so you don't have to." Margaret's expression turned wistful. "My William was the same way when I was carrying our first. Drove me half crazy with his hovering, but I missed it when he was gone." "Gone?" "Died 5 years back. Pneumonia that turned into something worse." Margaret's hand stilled on the fabric. 23 years we had together. Not enough, but more than some get. My advice? Let Rhett hover. Let him fuss. Because one day you'll wish he was still there to worry about whether you're resting enough." The word sent a chill through Elena. She'd been so focused on the immediate future, the baby, the birth, surviving the next 7 months, that she hadn't let herself think about the long term, about all the ways she could lose Rhett, or he could lose her. Life was fragile out here, precious and temporary, and not to be taken for granted. "I will," she promised. "I'll let him fuss." Margaret smiled, sad and knowing. "Good girl. Now stand still while I get this hem right." That evening, when Rhett came in from working and immediately asked how she was feeling, if she'd rested, if she needed anything, Elena didn't snap at him or roll her eyes. She went to him, wrapped her arms around him, and held on tight. "I love you," she said into his shirt. "I don't say it enough, but I love you. You're hovering and you're worrying and your completely irrational need to protect me from laundry baskets." Rhett's arms came around her, secure and warm. "What brought this on? Margaret told me to appreciate it while I have it, and she's right, so I'm appreciating you." "Well, appreciate away," Rhett said, but his voice had gone rough with emotion. "Because I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you, if I have anything to say about it." "Deal." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the fading light, both acutely aware of how lucky they were to have found this. Each other, this life, this chance at happiness neither had expected. August brought heat that made Elena miserable. She was 6 months pregnant now, her belly unmistakably round, her energy flagging despite her determination to keep working. The house felt like an oven despite open windows, and even simple tasks left her breathless and sweating. Rhett found her one afternoon lying on the floor in the coolest room, a wet cloth over her face. "That's it," he said. "We're building you a better house." Elena lifted the cloth to squint at him. "What? A bigger house? With proper ventilation, more windows, a room on the north side where it stays cooler. I should have done it months ago." "Rhett, we don't need—" "Yes, we do. We're having a baby. We need more space anyway, a nursery, and you need to be comfortable." He was already in planning mode, that particular intensity taking over. "I'll talk to the carpenter in town. Get it started before winter." That's expensive. We can afford it. You've been saving us money left and right with your account management. Consider this an investment in our future. Elena struggled to sit up, and Rhett immediately helped her, his hands gentle. You're serious about this? Completely. Unless you object? She thought about it. A bigger house. More room. A space designed for the life they were building instead of the solitary existence Rhett had led before her. I don't object, but I want input on the design. Wouldn't have it any other way. They spent the next few evenings planning, sketching rough layouts, arguing about room placement and window sizes, and whether they needed one fireplace or two. It was the first truly collaborative project they'd undertaken, and Elena found herself energized by it despite her physical exhaustion. Kitchen here, she said, pointing to the diagram, with windows facing east so I get morning light, and the nursery should be close to our bedroom, but not so close that we hear every sound. Our bedroom, Rhett noted. Not separate rooms anymore? Elena looked up, met his eyes. Is that a problem? The opposite. He pulled her close, navigating carefully around her belly. I like the idea of our bedroom, our house, our family, all of it. Me too, Elena admitted. Somewhere along the way, this stopped being your ranch where I happened to live and became our home. I'm not sure exactly when it happened, but I'm glad it did. The house project gave them something to focus on besides Elena's growing discomfort and Rhett's mounting anxiety about the approaching birth. By September, the carpenter and his crew had broken ground on the addition, and the sound of hammering and sawing became the soundtrack to their days. Elena watched the structure take shape with a satisfaction that surprised her. This was permanent. This was them putting down roots, planning for a future that extended beyond survival into something that looked like permanence. What if we're jinxing it? She asked Rhett one night, watching him study the construction plans by lamplight. Building this house, planning like everything will be fine. What if something goes wrong? Rhett set the plans aside, pulled her into his arms. Then we'll deal with it, together. But I refuse to live in fear of what might happen. We're building this house because we believe in our future, because we're choosing to hope instead of hide. When did you become the optimistic one? When you showed me that hoping for things doesn't make you weak. He kissed her forehead, her nose, her mouth. You changed me, Elena. Made me believe that maybe I deserved more than just surviving, that maybe we both did. By October, Elena was 8 months pregnant and utterly miserable. Her back ached constantly, she couldn't sleep in any position, and the baby had developed a habit of kicking her ribs at the most inconvenient moments. I'm never doing this again, she announced one morning after a particularly sleepless night. Rhett, who'd been up with her through most of it, rubbed her feet without complaint. You say that now. I mean it. One child is plenty. Noted. He worked his thumbs into her arch, and Elena groaned with relief. Though you might feel differently after the baby's here. I won't. This is horrible. I feel like a beached whale, an angry, uncomfortable beached whale who can't see her own feet. A beautiful beached whale, Rhett offered. That doesn't help. Didn't think it would, but I had to try. Despite her misery, Elena laughed. You're handling this better than I expected. I thought you'd be a nervous wreck by now. I am a nervous wreck. I'm just hiding it better than you're hiding your discomfort. We're quite a pair. Yeah, Rhett agreed, moving to massage her other foot. We really are. The new addition to the house was nearly finished. Just detail work and finishing touches remained. They'd already moved some furniture in, prepared the nursery with a crib Rhett had built himself, and linens Margaret had helped Elena sew. Everything was ready. They were ready. Or as ready as two terrified people could be for something they'd never done before. November brought the first snow and Elena's first contractions. False labor, Dr. Walsh called it, when Rhett drove her to town in a panic, certain the baby was coming early. It's normal, the doctor said, unimpressed by their terror. Your body is practicing. The real thing will be different. Trust me, you'll know. How will I know? Elena demanded. You'll want to murder someone, probably your husband. When that feeling hits, you're actually in labor. Rhett paled visibly, and Dr. Walsh laughed. An actual laugh, rare from the stern physician. You'll both survive this. Thousands of women give birth every day. Yes, it's painful. Yes, it's dangerous. But you're healthy, young enough, and strong-willed enough to make it through. Have a little faith. Faith. Elena turned the word over in her mind on the ride home. She'd lost faith in so many things, in love, in her own worth, in the idea that life could be more than just enduring. But Rhett had given it back to her, piece by piece, through his actions, if not always his words. "I'm scared," she admitted as the ranch came into view. "Me too," Rhett said. "But we've survived everything else life has thrown at us. We'll survive this too." "Promise?" He pulled the wagon to a stop, turned to face her fully. "I promise that I will do everything in my power to make sure you and this baby come through safe, that I won't leave your side, that whatever happens, we face it together." "That's not exactly a promise that everything will be fine. Because I can't promise that. I can only promise that I'll be there, no matter what. That enough?" Elena thought about it, about all the empty promises men had made her over the years, about how Rhett's careful honesty was worth more than 1,000 false assurances. "Yeah," she said finally, "that's enough." December arrived cold and clear. Elena was 9 months pregnant and ready, more than ready, for this to be over. Every morning she woke up hoping this would be the day. Every night she went to bed disappointed, but also secretly relieved. The real labor started on a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks before Christmas. Elena woke at dawn with a pain that wrapped around her entire middle and squeezed like a vice. By the time it released, she was gasping, and Rhett was already out of bed, pulling on clothes. "That was it, wasn't it? The real thing?" "I think so." Another contraction hit, and Elena gripped the bed frame. "Yes, definitely. Get Dr. Walsh." "I'm not leaving you." "Rhett, you have to." "Hank can get her. I'm staying." He was out the door before she could argue, shouting for Hank. Within minutes, she heard hoofbeats as the old hand rode for town at a gallop. Rhett came back to find Elena trying to get dressed, tears of frustration streaming down her face as another contraction made her double over. "Let me help." He got her into a loose nightgown, helped her downstairs to the bedroom they'd prepared on the first floor of the new addition, closer to everything, easier for the doctor. The contractions came faster, harder, each one stealing her breath and her ability to think about anything except getting through it. Rhett stayed with her through all of it, his hand in hers, his voice in her ear talking her through the worst moments. "You're doing so well. Just breathe. I've got you. You're not alone." Dr. Walsh arrived what felt like hours later, but was probably only 90 minutes, her competent presence immediately making everything feel more manageable. "Let's see where we are," she said briskly, and after a quick examination, nodded with satisfaction. "You're progressing well. Could be another few hours, could be sooner. Every birth is different." It was 6 hours. 6 hours of pain that rewrote Elena's understanding of what her body could endure. 6 hours of Rhett refusing to leave despite Dr. Walsh's suggestions that he might be more comfortable elsewhere. 6 hours of digging deep for strength she didn't know she possessed. And then finally, a cry. High and angry and absolutely perfect. "It's a girl!" Dr. Walsh announced, holding up a tiny, red-faced, furious infant. "Healthy lungs, all her fingers and toes. Congratulations." Elena couldn't speak, couldn't do anything except stare as the doctor cleaned the baby and wrapped her in a soft blanket. When Dr. Walsh placed the infant in her arms, Elena felt something fundamental shift in her chest, a love so fierce and immediate it bordered on violence. "A girl," she whispered, touching the impossibly small fingers, the dark hair, the face that was somehow both Rhett and her and entirely its own person. Rhett leaned over them both, his hand trembling as he stroked the baby's cheek. "She's perfect. You're perfect. I can't believe—" His voice broke, and Elena looked up to see tears streaming down his face unchecked. "We did it," she said, her own tears matching his. "We made a person." "You made a person. I just watched in awe." Dr. Walsh made a sound that might have been approval or amusement. "You two are going to be insufferable, aren't you? All sappy and emotional?" "Probably," Rhett agreed, not looking away from his daughter. "I'm fine with that." Later, after Dr. Walsh had done all her checking and declared both mother and baby healthy, after Elena had been cleaned up and settled into bed with the infant in her arms, Rhett sat beside them, his expression one of complete wonder. "What should we name her?" Elena asked. "I don't know. We never decided." They talked about names, thrown around ideas, but nothing had felt right. "Now, Looking at this tiny person who'd fought her way into the world with such determination, Elena knew. Grace, she said. Grace called her. Because she's a gift we never expected and definitely didn't deserve. Rhett considered it, then smiled. A full, genuine smile that transformed his usually stern face. Grace. I like it. Grace Margaret Calder, maybe? After your friend? She'd like that. Elena stroked Grace's cheek, marveling at the softness. Hello, Grace. Welcome to the family. Your father is overbearing and your mother is stubborn, but we love each other and we're going to love you more than is probably healthy. Speak for yourself, Rhett said, leaning down to kiss first his daughter's head, then Elena's lips. I'm very healthy about my emotions. You're crying right now. Happy tears don't count. I'm pretty sure they do. He pulled her close, careful not to jostle the baby, and Elena leaned into his warmth, exhausted and elated and overwhelmed by the weight of what they'd created together. A daughter, a family, a life built from the ashes of broken dreams and failed attempts. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and quiet. Inside, Grace whimpered and then settled, her tiny fist wrapped around Elena's finger with surprising strength. They sat like that for a long time, the three of them, bound together by love and choice and the absolute refusal to give up on each other no matter how hard things got. It wasn't perfect. Nothing about their life was perfect, but it was theirs, messy and real and worth fighting for. And in that moment, that was more than enough. It was everything. The first month with Grace was nothing like Elena had imagined. There was no gentle settling into motherhood. No peaceful moments of maternal bliss. There was exhaustion so deep it felt like drowning, endless crying that no amount of rocking or feeding could soothe, and the constant terror that she was doing everything wrong. Rhett tried to help, but he was equally clueless. They took turns walking the floor at 3 a.m, both of them hollow-eyed and snapping at each other over things that didn't matter. She's still crying, Rhett said one night, handing Grace over after an hour of unsuccessful soothing. I can hear that, Elena snapped, taking their daughter and immediately feeling guilty for her tone. I'm sorry, I'm just so tired. Me too. Rhett ran both hands through his hair, making it stand up in wild directions. She's supposed to cry this much? Should we get Dr. Walsh again? Dr. Walsh said some babies just cry more than others, that Grace is healthy, just vocal about her opinions. She gets that from you. Excuse me? The being vocal about opinions part, Rhett clarified quickly, which I love about you, usually, when it's not 3 a.m. and I haven't slept in 4 days. Despite her exhaustion, Elena smiled. We're a mess, aren't we? Complete disaster. But Rhett moved behind her, his arms wrapping around both her and Grace, his chin on her shoulder. But we're a mess together. That counts for something. Grace chose that moment to finally quiet, her cries tapering to whimpers and then silence as she fell asleep against Elena's chest. Both parents held their breath, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever spell had finally settled their daughter. Don't sneeze, Elena whispered. Wasn't planning on it. They stood frozen like that for 10 minutes before carefully, slowly, transferring Grace to her cradle. She stirred but didn't wake, and they both exhaled in relief. Back in their own bed, Rhett pulled Elena against him, and she could feel how tightly wound he still was. Talk to me, she murmured. I'm terrified I'm going to break her. She's so small, Elena, so fragile. What if I hold her wrong, or forget to support her head, or... You won't, you're already a good father. How can you possibly know that? I don't know what I'm doing. Neither do I. But I see the way you look at her, the way you check on her every 5 minutes even when she's sleeping, the way you won't let anyone else change her or feed her unless they wash their hands first. That's love, Rhett. That's being a parent. He was quiet for a long moment, then, my father never looked at me the way I look at Grace, never held me except to correct my posture or criticize my form. I don't want to be that, but I don't know how to be anything else. Then don't be your father. Be you. The you I married, difficult and overprotective and so determined to do right by the people you love that you'll exhaust yourself trying. That doesn't sound healthy. It's not, but it's real. And real is what Grace needs, not perfect. Rhett pulled her closer, his face buried in her hair. I don't deserve you. We've been over this. You're stuck with me anyway. Sleep took them both before they could say anything else. And when Grace woke them 2 hours later, they faced it together, tired and grumpy, but together nonetheless. By February, they'd found something resembling a rhythm. Grace still cried plenty, but they'd learned to distinguish between hungry cries, tired cries, and the particular wail that meant she just needed to be held. The ranch hands helped where they could, with Hank proving surprisingly adept at soothing the baby when both parents were at their wits' end. "It's been a while, but you don't forget," the old man said one afternoon, walking Grace around the kitchen while Elena tried to salvage a burned pot roast. "Had 4 of my own, back before my wife passed. Youngest would be about your age now, Mrs. Calder, if she'd lived." Elena paused in her scrubbing. She'd never heard Hank mention family before. "I'm sorry, I didn't know. Long time ago. Different life." He looked down at Grace, who'd finally stopped fussing and was staring at him with wide, serious eyes. "But holding this little one brings it back. The good parts, mostly. The way they smell, the weight of them in your arms, the trust they have that you'll keep them safe." "Did you?" "Keep them safe?" Hank's expression clouded. 3 of them, yes. Raised them to adulthood, saw them married and settled. The youngest, scarlet fever took her when she was just 6. Same sickness that took my wife a year later. After that, there wasn't much keeping me anywhere, so I drifted until I found the boss. He gave me purpose when I didn't have any left. Elena abandoned the pot, moved to stand beside him. "Thank you for helping with Grace. It means more than you know." "My pleasure, ma'am. Babies should be loved by as many people as possible. Makes them stronger. Teaches them the world isn't such a bad place after all." That conversation stayed with Elena through the following weeks. She'd been so focused on being Grace's mother, on the intimate bubble of their small family, that she hadn't thought about the broader community raising a child required. But she saw it now, in the way Margaret brought by meals and baby clothes her own grandchildren had outgrown, and how the other ranch hands took extra care to be quiet near the house during nap time, in the way even Marcus Brennan had sent over a carved wooden rattle with grudging congratulations. It took a village, people said, and Broken Creek was proving to be exactly that. Spring brought new challenges. Grace was 4 months old now, alert and curious, her personality emerging in ways both delightful and exhausting. She had Rhett's stubborn streak and Elena's vocal nature, a combination that meant she knew what she wanted and made sure everyone else knew too. "She's going to be trouble," Rhett said one morning, watching his daughter grab for everything within reach with single-minded determination. "She already is trouble," Elena corrected. "Yesterday, she grabbed my hair so hard I thought I'd go bald." "She has a good grip. That's important for ranch life." "She's 4 months old. She's not working cattle anytime soon." "You never know." But Rhett was smiling as he said it, reaching down to let Grace wrap her tiny fist around his finger. "Maybe she'll be the first female rancher in Montana Territory. Or a doctor, or a teacher, or whatever she wants to be." Elena watched them together, father and daughter, and felt her heart squeeze with love and fear in equal measure. That's what I want for her: choices, options, not to be limited by what other people think she should be. Rhett glanced up at her, understanding in his eyes. "Like you were. Like we both were, in different ways. You were told you had to be hard, emotionless, always in control. I was told I had to be soft, agreeable, less, everything. And look where that got us. 2 damaged people who almost missed out on this because we believed what others said about who we should be. But we didn't miss it," Rhett pointed out. "We found each other. Found this." He gestured at Grace, at the house they'd built together, at the life they'd created. "That's worth something." "It's worth everything," Elena agreed, "and I want Grace to know that, to understand that the best things in life come from being authentically yourself, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." It was a conversation they returned to often as Grace grew. What they wanted to teach her, how to raise her to be strong without being hardened, how to give her the freedom they'd never had without spoiling her or leaving her unprepared for frontier realities. "It's complicated," Rhett said during one such discussion. "Parenting is complicated," Elena replied, "but we've handled complicated before. We'll handle this too." The summer brought visitors. Margaret and her husband William Jr., other ranching families who'd heard about the Calder baby and wanted to welcome her properly. Elena found herself hosting gatherings she'd once dreaded, discovering that motherhood had given her a kind of confidence she hadn't possessed before. She belonged now, not as Rhett's mail-order wife or the woman who'd answered a cold advertisement, but as herself, mother, partner, ranch manager, neighbor, friend. "You're different," Margaret observed one afternoon while they watched Grace play on a blanket in the shade. "More settled, like you finally found where you fit." "I have," Elena said simply. "It took a while, and it wasn't the path I expected, but I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Not everyone can say that. Most of us just endure where we end up. Margaret's eyes were distant. "But you and Rhett, you built something real from nothing. That's rare." It didn't feel like building at the time. It felt like barely surviving, most days. That's what building always feels like in the moment. You only recognize it as construction once you can step back and see what you've made. Margaret smiled. "And you've made something good here. A real partnership. A real home." Elena thought about that later, after the visitors had gone and Grace was napping and Rhett was out checking fence lines. She stood on the porch of their expanded house, looking out over the ranch, and tried to see it through Margaret's eyes. They had built something, hadn't they? Not just a house or a successful ranch operation, but a life. A marriage based on mutual respect and genuine love, rather than the transaction that had brought them together. A family that worked not because everything was perfect, but because they'd learned to navigate imperfection together. It hadn't been easy. There were still days when Rhett's need for control clashed with Elena's need for autonomy, when they fought over decisions or went to bed angry. Days when Grace cried inconsolably, and they both questioned whether they were equipped for parenthood. Days when the ranch demanded more than they had to give, and they collapsed into bed too exhausted even to talk. But there were also mornings when Elena woke to find Rhett already up with Grace, walking her around the kitchen and singing off-key lullabies in a voice that would never be musical but was perfect because it was his. Evenings when they worked side by side on accounts or plans, their partnership so seamless it felt like breathing. Moments when Grace smiled or laughed or did something new, and they'd look at each other with shared wonder at this person they'd created. The hard days made the good ones matter more. That's what Elena was learning. Happiness wasn't the absence of struggle. It was choosing to keep going despite it. Keep loving despite fear. Keep building despite uncertainty. By autumn, Grace was nearly a year old, babbling nonsense words and pulling herself up on furniture with determined concentration. Rhett had started teaching her to pet the horses gently, his large hands guiding her small ones, his patience with their daughter infinite in ways it never was with anyone else. "She's going to be fearless," Elena said, watching from the fence as Grace reached for a horse's nose without hesitation. "Like her mother," Rhett replied. "I'm not fearless. I'm terrified constantly." "You're fearless where it matters. You took a risk on a stranger's advertisement. You stood up to Brennan. You pushed me to be better than I thought I could be." He shifted Grace to his other arm. "That's not the absence of fear. It's courage despite it." "When did you become so wise?" "When I married someone who forced me to think about things beyond cattle and weather." He leaned over to kiss her, Grace squirming between them. "Best decision I ever made answering your letter." "I thought I answered your advertisement." "Semantics. Point is, we found each other. That's the miracle." Later that evening, after Grace was asleep and they were finishing the day's account work together, Elena brought up something she'd been thinking about for weeks. "I want to hire a teacher for Grace when she's old enough. A real education, not just whatever I can teach her." Rhett looked up from the ledger. "You were a teacher. You can educate her better than most." "I can teach her reading and basic mathematics. But I want more for her than that. I want her to have options, opportunities, the kind of education that opens doors instead of closing them." "We're in the middle of Montana territory. Where exactly are we going to find this teacher?" "We bring one here. Build a schoolhouse on the property. Not just for Grace, for the other ranch children too. Jimmy's sister might come out once she's well enough. Hank mentioned his grandson might visit next summer. There are families within riding distance who'd benefit." Rhett set down his pen, considering. "That's ambitious. It's necessary. If we want Grace to have choices, she needs education. And if we're building something that lasts beyond us, we need to invest in the next generation." "You've been thinking about this a lot." "I've been thinking about what kind of legacy we want to leave. The ranch will be Grace's someday, yes, but I want to leave her more than land and cattle. I want to leave her the tools to make her own choices, to be whoever she wants to be." Rhett was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Then he reached across the table, took her hand. You're right. We'll do it. Build the schoolhouse, hire a teacher, whatever it takes. Just like that? Just like that. Because you're thinking about our daughter's future, and I trust your judgment. Because you were right about the breeding stock, right about the account systems, right about pretty much everything you've pushed me on. Why would this be different? Elena felt tears prick her eyes. A year ago, Rhett would have dismissed this as unnecessary expense, would have insisted he knew best, would have made the decision unilaterally. Now he was trusting her vision, partnering with her on something that mattered deeply. They'd come so far from that first awkward dinner, from the cold transaction and careful boundaries, from two damaged people protecting themselves from further hurt. "I love you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I know," Rhett replied, but his eyes were soft. "I love you too. Even when you come up with expensive, complicated projects that are going to take years to implement properly. Especially then." "Especially then," he agreed. The schoolhouse project consumed the following months. They hired architects, secured lumber, began construction on a site near the main road where other families could easily access it. Elena corresponded with teaching colleges back east, looking for someone willing to relocate to Montana Territory for decent pay and a community that valued education. The work was exhausting on top of everything else. Managing the ranch, raising Grace, navigating the endless challenges of frontier life. But it also gave Elena purpose beyond her immediate family. She was building something that would outlast her, that would benefit children she'd never meet, that would change the trajectory of this small community. "You're going to change the world," Rhett told her one evening as she pored over curriculum proposals. "I'm building one schoolhouse. That's hardly world-changing. You're giving children opportunities they wouldn't otherwise have. You're showing them that education matters, that their futures aren't predetermined by where they were born. That's absolutely world-changing, even if it starts small." Elena looked up at him, this man who'd started as a stranger advertising for a transaction and become her partner in every sense that mattered. "You've changed too. The Rhett who placed that advertisement never would have supported this." "The Rhett who placed that advertisement was an idiot," he said flatly. "Thought he could control everything, keep everyone at arm's length, never risk caring about anything beyond the ranch. Then you showed up and ruined all my careful plans. Sorry, not sorry. Don't be. Best thing that ever happened to me, having my plans ruined." He pulled her into his lap, careful not to disturb her papers. "You taught me that control is an illusion, that the best things come from letting go, taking risks, choosing connection over safety. I didn't teach you that. We learned it together." "Fair enough." He kissed her temple. "We're still learning, actually. Probably will be for the rest of our lives." "Good," Elena said. "I'd hate to think we'd figured everything out already. Where's the fun in that?" Grace's first birthday arrived on a cold December day, 1 year exactly since she'd fought her way into the world. They celebrated with a small gathering, the ranch hands, Margaret and her family, a few other neighbors who'd become friends. Grace smashed cake into her face with gleeful enthusiasm, while the adults laughed and took turns holding her. Elena watched Rhett with their daughter, saw the way his whole face transformed when Grace reached for him, and felt overwhelming gratitude for this life they'd built. It wasn't the life she'd imagined as a young woman dreaming of romance and fairy tale endings. It was better, messier and more complicated, but infinitely more real. "Happy?" Margaret asked, appearing at her elbow. "Terrified," Elena admitted. "But yes, happy. Is that normal? Being both at once?" "Perfectly normal. Love is terrifying. It gives other people the power to destroy you, but it's also the only thing that makes life worth living." Margaret squeezed her arm. "You've done well, Elena. Built something solid here. Something that'll last." "I hope so. I know so. I've seen marriages crumble over less stress than you two have faced, but you keep choosing each other. That's what matters. Not that everything is easy, but that you keep choosing partnership even when it's hard." That night, after everyone had gone and Grace was asleep and the house was finally quiet, Elena and Rhett sat together by the fire. "A year," Elena said. "A year since Grace was born. 18 months since we got married. It feels like both forever and no time at all." "I know what you mean." Rhett pulled her against him, and she settled into the familiar warmth of his body. "Sometimes I can barely remember what life was like before you. Other times it feels like you just arrived yesterday." "Any regrets?" "Not a single one." "You?" Elena thought about it, really thought about the fear and desperation that had driven her to answer that advertisement, about the cold transaction and the careful boundaries, about all the moments of doubt and struggle and sheer exhaustion. No, she said finally, not one regret. This wasn't the life I planned, but it's the life I needed, the life I wanted, even when I didn't know I wanted it. We're quite a pair, Rhett said, echoing her words from that first day. Yeah, Elena agreed, we really are. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn low, both of them acutely aware of Grace sleeping in the next room and the life they'd created together, and the future stretching before them with all its uncertainty and promise. The contract that had brought them together was long gone, burned to ashes. But what had grown in its place was stronger than any legal document, a partnership forged in hardship, tempered by choice, and sustained by the simple daily decision to keep showing up for each other. It wasn't perfect. There would be more fights, more challenges, more moments of doubt. Rhett would always struggle with control, and Elena would always push against it. Grace would grow up and become her own person with her own challenges. The ranch would face hardships, drought, disease, economic downturns, all the unpredictable dangers of frontier life. But they'd face it together, as partners, as family, and that made all the difference. By spring, the schoolhouse was nearly complete, a sturdy building with large windows and a small library Elena had been collecting books for. They'd found a teacher too, a young woman named Sarah Mitchells from Pennsylvania who wanted adventure and was willing to exchange it for decent pay and a purpose. You're sure about this? Rhett asked as they inspected the finished building. It's a big commitment, paying a teacher's salary, maintaining the building, all of it. I'm sure, Elena said. This matters. For Grace, for this community, for the future we're building. Then it matters to me too. He wrapped an arm around her waist. You know, when I placed that advertisement, I thought I was hiring help, thought I could buy my way to a legacy without actually having to change or grow or risk anything. And instead I got you, and you made me grow whether I wanted to or not, made me risk everything, made me realize that legacy isn't about control or property. It's about the people you raise and the community you build and the changes you make that outlast you. Elena leaned into him, feeling the solid strength of his body, the steady beat of his heart. We've come a long way from that first awkward dinner. We have. But you know what? I wouldn't change any of it. Not the awkwardness, not the fights, not even the terror of those first months with Grace. Because all of it brought us here. To this. And this is exactly where I want to be. Even with an expensive schoolhouse and a wife who keeps coming up with new projects, especially with those things. He turned her to face him, his hands framing her face with familiar tenderness. You make me better, Elena. Make me want to be better. That's worth more than all the cattle in Montana. That's very romantic for someone who claimed not to be romantic. I'm learning, slowly, but learning. He kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. I figure I've got the rest of my life to get it right. You'd better, because I'm not going anywhere. Good, because I'm not letting you go. Ever. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the spring sunshine, the schoolhouse behind them, and the ranch spread out before them, and their daughter waiting at home with Hank. It was a perfect moment, but not because everything was perfect, because it was real and earned and exactly what they'd chosen. That summer, Grace took her first steps. Stumbling from Elena to Rhett across the kitchen floor, her face split in a triumphant grin. They both cheered like she'd accomplished something monumental, because to them, she had. Every milestone felt like a miracle, proof that they were doing something right, despite all their doubts. The schoolhouse opened in September with 6 students, Grace still too young, but children from neighboring ranches eager for education. Sarah Mitchells proved to be everything Elena had hoped, passionate, patient, genuinely committed to teaching in ways that went beyond rote memorization. You've done something amazing here, Sarah told Elena after the first week. Given these children a future they wouldn't otherwise have. I just built a building and hired a teacher, Elena demurred. You did more than that. You believed education mattered enough to invest in it. That belief is what changes communities, what changes lives. Elena thought about those words often in the months that followed. She'd started this journey believing she was worthless, too old, too smart, too much of everything that made her unmarriageable. But Rhett had seen her worth when she couldn't, had given her a place where her intelligence and strength were assets rather than liabilities. And now she was paying that forward, creating opportunities for children who might otherwise never have them. It was a kind of legacy she'd never imagined wanting. But now that she had it, she couldn't imagine life without it. Grace turned 2 on a snowy December day, her vocabulary expanding daily, her personality becoming more defined, stubborn like her father, curious like her mother, fearless in ways that both delighted and terrified her parents. "She's going to give us gray hair," Rhett said, watching her climb onto a chair she'd been told to avoid. "She already has," Elena replied. "Look." She showed him a strand of white among her brown hair. "That's from me, not Grace." "Probably both. But I'll take it. Gray hair means we're growing old together. That's what we wanted, isn't it?" "It is," Rhett agreed, "though I imagined it happening more slowly." "Where's the fun in that? 2 years of marriage, 2 years of partnership, 2 years of learning that love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect moments, but about showing up day after day, choosing each other over and over, building something real from honest foundations." They'd started as a transaction, cold, practical, emotionless. But they'd become something neither had dared hope for: a real marriage, a real partnership, a real family. The contract was gone, burned to ashes. But what remained was stronger than any legal document could ever be. It was trust earned through action, love proven through choice, partnership forged in the daily work of building a life together. "Elena," Rhett said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. Grace was asleep inside, the ranch was quiet, and the future stretched before them with all its unknowable possibilities. "Thank you." "For what?" "For answering the advertisement, for taking a chance on a stranger, for not running when you realized what you'd gotten yourself into, for making me better than I was, for giving me grace, for building this life with me even when it was hard, for everything." Elena took his hand, laced their fingers together. "Thank you for seeing me when no one else could, for giving me purpose when I'd lost it, for loving me despite, or maybe because of, all the difficult parts, for being the partner I didn't know I needed. We're quite a team." "The best team," Elena agreed. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness claimed the sky, both of them thinking about how far they'd come. From strangers to partners to lovers to parents, from isolation to community, from survival to actually living. The journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges ahead. Grace growing up with all the complications that entailed, the ranch facing whatever hardships the frontier threw at them, their own relationship evolving as time passed and circumstances changed. But they'd face it together. That was the foundation they'd built, stronger than stone, more enduring than steel. Not perfection, but partnership. Not ease, but commitment. Not the absence of struggle, but the determination to keep choosing each other anyway. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything they'd never known they wanted, and exactly what they'd needed all along. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Elena leaned her head on Rhett's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, hearing the steady beat of his heart. Behind them, the house they'd built together stood warm and welcoming. Inside, their daughter slept peacefully. Around them, the ranch they'd transformed from a solitary empire into a real home spread out across the valley. They'd started with nothing but desperation and a business arrangement. They'd built a life worth living, a love worth keeping, a legacy worth leaving, and if that wasn't a miracle, Elena didn't know what was. "I love you," she said softly. "I love you too," Rhett replied. "Always have, even when I didn't know it. Always will, until my last breath." "That's very romantic. I'm getting better at it." "You are," Elena agreed. "You really are." The Montana sky stretched endless above them, stars scattered like promises across black velvet. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. Closer, a horse whinnied softly in the barn. The sounds of life, of home, of everything they'd built together. It wasn't the fairy tale Elena had dreamed of as a girl. It was better, messier and harder, and infinitely more real. It was a life earned through choice and sustained through partnership. It was 2 broken people who'd found each other and decided to build something whole. And as they sat together in the gathering darkness, neither of them alone anymore, both of them exactly where they belonged, They knew with absolute certainty that this, imperfect and complicated and sometimes terrifying, was exactly what happiness looked like. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of someone to struggle alongside. Not perfection, but real partnership. Not a fairy tale, but something better. A love story written by two people who'd learned that the best things in life come not from avoiding risk, but from taking the right ones. Together, they'd taken the biggest risk of all, believing in each other. And it had made all the difference.